In this video, I'll explain the entire Borderlands timeline in chronological order. I'll cover all 5 mainland games, 2 spin-offs, several comics and novels, and a total of 14 DLCs. Throughout the video, a timeline animation will run at the bottom of the screen, so you can easily follow along and see exactly when the events I'm describing take place. So, without further ado, let's start with some backstory. In eons past, there was a race of extraterrestrials called Eridians. The Eridians were a mysterious people who had long disappeared from existence by the time the stories of the mainline Borderlands game begin. On the other hand, we do know some pretty important details about this shadowy bunch based on the discovered accounts of a siren named Nereid. For example, we know that the Eridians used to call the planet Necrotafeo as their throne word. Make no mistake though, Necrotafeo was just one of the many worlds that the Eridians colonized and settled in the 6 galaxies back then. Now, although the Eridians are already long gone by the time the first Borderlands game begins, their influence and reach stretched across the countless millennia that followed. That's all thanks to the fact that Eridian technology was far more advanced, even by present-day standards within the Borderlands universe. With their supreme grasp on technological innovation, the Eridians crafted fearsome weapons, ranging from guns that shot energy to automatons called Guardians, artificial creatures tasked with protecting Eridians' treasures and secrets. And as testament to the Eridians' mastery of their craft, a lot of these things actually survived until the present day. Perhaps the most glaring piece of tech that the Eridians left are the vaults. Vaults are pretty self-explanatory. They're structures that were specifically designed to house the Eridians' most highly prized artifacts. However, that's only if you look at these vaults on a surface level, because there's so much more than that. In fact, one might even say these structures were the only things keeping the entire universe from being entirely annihilated. That's because these vaults also housed fearsome monsters behind each of their doors. Now, let's talk about the Sirens a little bit. The Sirens, like the Eridians, happen to be one of the oldest factions in the world of Borderlands. Although we're not entirely sure when exactly they came into existence, we can speculate that the Order of Sirens has been around long before humanity popped out in the cosmos. There was actually a point in Borderlands history when both the Order of Sirens and the Eridians coexisted. You can think of the Sirens as this group of cosmic witches imbued with powers that defy the laws of physics. Each and every Siren is identifiable by the distinct tattoo-like markings covering half their body. They can also grow wings and harness the power of the element Iridium to augment their abilities. Oh, and Sirens also have the power to charge vault keys, the objects needed to gain access to the Eridian vaults. Now, all those things we mentioned are what you'd call the quote-unquote general abilities shared by each Siren within the Order. On the other hand, each Siren possesses a unique power that their sisters do not. Namely, these are phase walking, or the power to open interdimensional portals that allow a Siren and her companions to travel through the space-time continuum. Phase locking, which is the power to create force bubbles that can trap anything or anyone. On top of that, phase locking also allows the Siren to control the mind of anyone they've trapped within their energy fields for a period of time. Then there's the phase shift ability. The long and short of it is that phase shifting is a form of technopathy, the ability to control machines and contraptions remotely using the Siren's own energy. Next is the phase trance ability, which allows the Siren to create psychic projections of her own body to bolster her own physical strength and skills. And finally, there's the phase leech ability. It's arguably the most fearsome among the Siren's unique powers, as phase leeching allows a Siren to siphon off the life force from any living thing. Not only that, but this power also gives its user the ability to absorb whatever unique skills their target possesses. Phase leeching is rather unique even among the other special Siren abilities. For one, a Siren who's imbued with this specific power loses the general ability to charge vault keys, since the opposite always occurs when they attempt to do so. And then there's the fact that a Siren who has the phase leeching ability can potentially absorb an unlimited amount of energy from Iridium without suffering from any side effects. Oh, and these are the Siren's abilities that we've seen so far. By no means are these the definitive list of powers members of their order possess. In any case, it became common knowledge that only 6 Sirens could exist simultaneously at any given point by the time we reach the present day. It should also be noted that there's a debate within Borderlands fandom regarding this. Some people think that there are only 6 Sirens at any given time, while others think there's 7. For the sake of this video, let's just say there are 6, although it could easily be the other way around. More to the point, being a Siren is a position for life. When one dies, a Siren has the option to either choose her successor or pass on her powers and status to any random person in the Borderlands cosmos. Also, Sirens are typically female, although we'd find out that this is not a hard and fast rule, as there are instances in the Borderlands universe where someone male exhibited undeniable Siren qualities, such as Troy Calypso. At an unspecified period in the past, the Eridians came across a creature known as the Destroyer. The Destroyer was this monster from an entirely different dimension that consumed and destroyed everything in its path. As a result, the Eridians were forced to combat this grave threat for fear that the Destroyer would inevitably consume the entire universe. So, the Eridians built a structure to contain this eldritch creature, the Great Vault. The Great Vault dwarfed all the others that came before it, as this one was the literal size of a planet, and it was built for the specific purpose of trapping the Destroyer. As it would be revealed though, this was not the first time that the Eridians created a vault to trap monsters in. The truth is, there were several of them, each housing an otherworldly monstrosity. Now, the Great Vault was perhaps the most costly invention that the Eridians had created. You see, part of sealing away the Destroyer using this megastructure also involved the Eridians sacrificing their own life force to power it. As such, all the Eridian inhabitants of Necrotafeo gave their lives to generate the necessary energy to seal the Destroyer within the Great Vault. The last part of this process involved a member of the Sirens, Nereid, a Siren who possessed the Phase Leech ability. She was also the one responsible for performing the ritual that sealed the Destroyer within the Great Vault. Afterwards, she locked herself inside another vault, which was situated in Necrotafeo itself. Curiously enough, she also broke the universal rule of the Order of Sirens. Instead of allowing her power and status to be passed on upon her demise, she made it so that her phase leeching ability remained with her, forbidding the next generation of Sirens to acquire this fearsome power. Aside from that, we also discover that the Eridians created a key for the Great Vault and assigned a respective guardian for it, and the Great Vault itself. On one hand, there was the guardian known as the Warrior, which was tasked with keeping watch of the Great Vault. Then there was the Sentinel, the guardian placed at the key and the only creature to possess the true knowledge behind the Great Vault at the time. Time would pass and the Great Vault would eventually be called the planet Pandora. Its key was Pandora's moon, also known as Elpis. Oh, and one last thing. The Great Vault was designed to have a chute that served as a feeding hole for the Destroyer. And every couple of centuries, sacrifices were thrown in to keep the creature docile and fed. Let's turn the clock a few million years into the future. Along the way, a new species popped up in the universe, the human race. Borderlands' depiction of humans is pretty much similar to what you'd see in most other media franchises. They're a species driven by curiosity, greed, desire, and everything in between. They're also mouthy as hell most of the time. Regardless, this race would eventually develop their own tech throughout their existence until they gained the capability to travel the stars at speeds faster than light. Also, it was during this period that the human race eventually discovered and more or less settled in the 6 known galaxies of the Borderlands universe. And since this is humanity we're talking about, of course the first thing they did was to look for places and stuff they could use to propagate their species and fill their pockets. You should also be aware that humanity in this era was basically ruled by a single political entity known as the Galactic Government, which oversaw the species' affairs during their voyages and conquests across the universe. The problem was that the Galactic Government had a tendency to rely on private corporations and their resources in order to keep things running. And as you'd expect, the grubby CEOs of these companies eventually gained so much influence in the government that they took over it entirely. From there, more crap hit the fan, as these organizations started competing for territory, resources, and supremacy throughout the known universe. In fact, things got so bad that these private institutions found themselves engaged in full armed conflict, which would be known as the Corporate Wars. The strongest and largest organizations, of course, survived the conflict and eventually tried coming up with a peace treaty known as the 30-Year Accord. But like we said, private institutions are scummy as hell, and the 30-Year Accord ended up lasting a mere 4 months before the corporate wars erupted again and these companies went back to battling each other. By the time this conflict wound down, only the biggest and scummiest companies were left standing, such as the Atlas Corporation, the Dahl Corporation, and the Hyperion Corporation. Each of these companies would end up playing a part once we start talking about the mainland Borderlands game. For now, let's fast forward a couple of 100 years or so, to around 3 decades before Borderlands' present day. Here we meet a humble dude with big dreams named Typhon de Leon. Typhon was born to a family of turd farmers, and I'm not joking around with that. Anyway, he unfortunately lost his parents when he was a teenager. Alone and having no desire to cultivate turds, Typhon decided to strike out on his own and travel the galaxy in hopes of satiating his thirst for knowledge. Well, that, and he wanted to hit it big. In any case, Typhon ended up hitching a few rides here and there until he reached the planet Promethea. On Promethea, Typhon comes across one of the Eridians' ancient vaults and manages to sell its loot to a then upstart company called Atlas. From there, Typhon became committed to searching for more vaults, which effectively turned him into the Borderlands universe's very first vault hunter. Now, vault hunters are pretty much treasure hunters similar to Indiana Jones or Nathan Drake, except they are looting vaults in space. Anyway, Typhon then continued traveling the galaxy in search for more vaults. On the other hand, Atlas, the company who brought the loot from Typhon earlier, took advantage of the Eridian tech they got their hands on and used it to become the galaxy's most powerful corporation. Atlas had its hands on a lot of industries, but they have a primary interest in the field of weapons development. Eventually, Atlas grew so big and powerful that they successfully expanded their operations to other planets in the galaxy. One of these planets was Pandora, which, if you remember, also happened to be the Great Vault in which the Destroyer is kept. But don't worry about that for now, because no one at this point knew that. It was also around this period that another company called the Dahl Corporation arrived on Pandora and its moon Elpis to conduct mining operations and make money. To paint a clearer picture, Dahl was in charge of harvesting Pandora and Elpis natural reserves, while Atlas busied itself overseeing Pandora's human communities with the help of their private army called the Crimson Lance. Along the way, Typhon met a lady named Leda Calypso during one of his travels. He and Leda would eventually fall in love, and thanks to a bit of luck and Leda's expertise as a historian, the two would come across the ancient throne world of the Eridians, the planet Necrotafeo. While there, Leda and Typhon discovered yet another Eridian vault. They'd managed to take down the monster within it and then pretty much started living inside the vault. Leda also ended up giving birth to her and Typhon's twin children there. These twins were Troy and Tyrene Calypso. Unknown to them or their parents, Troy and Tyrene were born in the same vault that the ancient siren Nereid locked herself in the aftermath of sealing the Destroyer. And due to this, for some reason, Nereid's phase leeching ability transferred to the twins. However, tragedy would strike when Tyrene accidentally took out Leda once her siren abilities kicked in during her youth. The tragedy changed their family from a happy one to, well, a not so happy one. So much so that Tyrene and Troy eventually left their home after they've had enough of Typhon's house rules. Now things were popping back on Pandora as Atlas, Dahl, and the rest of the human settlers managed to quickly develop their infrastructure and pretty much gain a solid foothold on the planet. However, they forgot to account for one thing. You see, Pandora had a different climate than, say, regular Earth. The humans who settled it, however, didn't know that the only reason Pandora seemed reasonably inhabitable was because they arrived there during one of its winter periods, which lasted for about 7 years at a time. So winter eventually gave way to summer, and once the snow thawed, so did Pandora's native inhabitants awaken from their slumber. And well, let's just say Pandora's native species aren't the kind to welcome unwanted visitors. Creatures like skags, scythids, and larva crabworms, among others, began to drive off Pandora's human settlers. And so, once a promising human community, Pandora soon turned into the Wild West. In the meantime, the Dahl Corporation decided to cut their losses and abandon Pandora. Now, the Dahl Corporation was a company that was eerily similar to real-world corporations, in that they do anything to cut costs for their operation. They did this by using slave labor from their own private prison camps and roster of employees. A few of these poor Dahl employees were Kyle, Hector, and his unit. You see, Hector and his men were once model workers for the Dahl Corporation's private army. They were so good at their job that their employers promised them an entire planet they could settle in once they'd served their time in service to the company. However, when that time came, Hector and his unit ultimately discovered that Dahl had screwed them over by sending them to Pandora and turning them into unpaid workers. Even worse, the Dahl Corporation didn't give a single toss about their forced laborers, as they ended up just letting them fend for themselves once the company left Pandora. Hector and his men were a few of these stranded souls, which forced them to hole up in one of Dahl's former mines on Pandora in order to avoid the planet's wildlife. Not to get ahead of ourselves, but we'd see more of Hector as the Borderlands saga goes on. On the other hand, Atlas also decided that Pandora was a lost cause, so they decided to call it quits too. Before all the chaos on Pandora happened, however, Atlas had been knee-deep in their so-called Gordy's Project, an initiative meant to look for more Eridian vaults on Pandora. However, they weren't just looking for any vaults. They were specifically looking for a vault called the Vault of the Traveler. A bit later, in the year 2873, we meet a woman named Patricia Tanis. Patricia was an archaeologist who specialized in Eridian artifacts. She also used to work for the Doll Corporation before the company ultimately left Pandora, when things started going south for them. However, Patricia decided to stay on the planet due to her unquenchable thirst for knowledge, specifically regarding rumors about an Eridian vault on Pandora. Eventually, Patricia managed to locate parts of a vault key with the help of a few bandits she personally hired. But you can always trust bandits to mess with you, and they ended up stealing the vault key fragments from Patricia. In turn, Patricia became increasingly wary of the outside world and chose to live life as a hermit in one of her dig sites. On the other hand, her discovery of the key fragment became a hot topic within Pandora's remaining human settlers. While all this was happening, Pandora's moon, Alpus, wasn't doing so hot either. For one, the private military that the Doll Corporation stationed there, which was led by a woman named Colonel Tungstina Zarpedon, severed their ties with the corporation after they discovered the vault on Alpus. From then on, Zarpedon and her men appointed themselves as the Alpus Vault's Guardians, known as the Lost Legion. The troubles didn't end there, because the Doll Corporation made sure they did a number on the heavenly body. By that we mean they mined Alpus so hard that it ultimately led to a cataclysmic event known as the Krakening, which pretty much wrecked Alpus and turned it into a smoldering hellhole. Then and only then did Doll decide to leave the Pandora star system. And this, guys, is where we can say the Borderlands saga promptly begins. Borderlands Origins, 2865. It is now the year 2865, and 4 souls stand by a bus stop on Pandora, waiting for their ride. One of them is Roland. He used to be a sergeant with the Atlas Crimson Lance unit. As Roland waits for the bus to arrive, his mind wanders to an earlier time, back when he was still on active duty within the Lances. We find out that Roland was able to get his hands on a classified document from Atlas. He checked it out in spite of explicit instructions that no one with the rank of sergeant or below could lay eyes on this file. Afterwards, Roland met with his fellow Crimson Lance squad members such as Armory, Boozer, and Scraps. And it's here we discover that Roland is not the kind of guy to blindly follow orders like a good soldier should. We also find out that Roland was a rather effective member of the Crimson Lance, as Boozer pointed out that Roland once took control of an entire human settlement with nothing but a taco wrapper. Seriously, a taco wrapper. Shortly after, the leader of their unit, Higgins, arrived on the scene and ordered Roland to have a word with him. Roland obeyed, and the two went to a private spot in their camp. There, Higgins interrogated Roland about whether he recently read a classified Atlas file. Roland firmly denied this, and after a bit of grilling from Higgins, he ultimately believed Roland before informing him of his upcoming mission, to clear out a place named the Collapsed Valley of Creatures, called Crumblers. Soon after that, Roland and his squad arrived at Collapsed Valley and promptly acted out Higgins' orders. They managed to take out a couple of Crumblers, and Armory even decided to adopt a juvenile, naming it Cutie Horny Face. But this was where things immediately went bad. All of a sudden, Armory was taken out by a sniper shot. Even worse, the guy who fired the gun was none other than Higgins. Higgins then revealed that this whole mission was just a farce to lure Roland and his unit so that Higgins could eliminate each one of them. You see, Higgins had been skimming money from Atlas and he planned on pinning his crimes on Roland and his squad. And after eliminating Armory, Higgins and his men proceeded to take out Boozer and Scraps too. On the other hand, Higgins committed the #1 sin when it comes to dispatching your enemies. That is to say, instead of making sure he eliminated Roland, Higgins and his crew only winged him and left him at the Collapsed Valley. Rookie mistake. Afterward, Roland swore revenge against Higgins and gave the scumbag his just desserts sometime after the fateful events at the Collapsed Valley. And now, here he is, about to board the fateful bus that would lead him to an epic adventure. On a side note, the prequel novel called Borderlands The Fallen also sheds more light to what Roland had been up to prior to the start of the games. Now, we won't focus on it too much, but all you should know about this story is that Roland presumably became a vault hunter and bounty hunter after leaving the Crimson Lance. And in Borderlands The Fallen, Roland meets a guy named Zach Finn, along with his family. From there, Roland did what he does best, shoot things, mostly Pandora's grotesque wildlife. Next, we have the second of our 4 travelers, Lilith. Whether it's by fate or circumstance, Lilith happens to belong to the Order of Sirens. Specifically, Lilith is the current siren imbued with the ability to phase walk. On top of that, Lilith can arguably be considered as the overall main character of the Borderlands saga. And as she waits for her ride, her mind wanders to times past. In what seems like a lifetime ago, Lilith used to live on a planet named Honus 4651 with her dad. Tragedy eventually struck her family when her dad met his end during their stay there. Before dying, Lilith's father had but one wish for his daughter: to go out there and explore the universe, promising the young girl that he'd always be with her. As soon as he died, a mysterious woman only known as the Eldest came up to the young girl to tell her that she was indeed a siren, and that exploring the universe would inevitably lead her to meet others of her kind. The Eldest also warned her that not all of the fellow sirens she might meet along the way would be friendly. Still, the Eldest insists for Lilith to go out there, sing her proverbial song, and craft her own story. Right after the old woman falls to the ground, Lilith's next memory happened years after that fateful day, and just a few moments from where she is now. We see her sitting in front of a bar as she drinks her day away. The bartender made small talk with her, asking Lilith why she was so glum. In reply, she told him that she was tired of people pretty much objectifying her whenever they see her. Because as you can see, Lilith is one hot sci-fi girl. And it's here where we get a clue that Lilith has become quite a popular lady ever since she left her planet, as she eventually revealed her name to the man in front of her. The bartender, in response, recognized who she was and immediately pulled out a gun from his counter. All of a sudden, another rando in the bar came up behind Lilith and pointed his own weapon at her. Trapped between a couple of barrels, Lilith casually phase-walked her form just as the two men pulled their triggers. In the end, the bartender and the rando ended up shooting each other, and so we now reach the present. Lilith sits up from her bar stool just as Marcus, the bus driver, arrives. Lilith is not too happy that Marcus is late, but she welcomes the guy's presence and boards his vehicle. We next find out that Marcus has already picked up Roland too, and surprisingly enough, Lilith kisses Roland. When he asks why she did that, Lilith simply tells Roland that she has traveled the galaxy for quite a bit, but that was the first time she had kissed someone. And well, a bit of awkward silence follows after that. Then we meet the third of our adventurers, Mordecai. We first see him laid down on the dirt as a woman approaches. The lady helps him get to his feet and introduces herself as Esmeralda. Esmeralda then pries into Mordecai's business, asking him how he ended up in the dirt. Mordecai tells her that he fended off a gang of bandits a few hours ago. The duo then travel together until they come across Marcus, who's currently getting his bus fixed. Esmeralda attempts to offer Marcus some help with the bus repairs, but Mordecai insists that they leave. Before doing so, Marcus approaches Mordecai and hands him his calling card. Mordecai has his doubts about Marcus, and it's only made worse when Esmeralda tells him he should never trust a guy like that. Still, Mordecai takes Marcus' card before they continue on their journey. Not long after, we find out that Mordecai and Esmeralda had been walking for about 15 miles. Mordecai gets understandably antsy and asks Esmeralda if they've reached their destination yet, and where the heck she's taking him anyway. Esmeralda replies by saying they're headed for a place of opportunity. They eventually reach a junkyard, and it's here that Esmeralda reveals her true colors. She points a gun at Mordecai, and the same gang of bandits that beat him up earlier emerge from their hiding spot. The bandits reveal that Esmeralda is a wanted woman with 10,000 credits attached to her name. Esmeralda also knows that Mordecai is a wanted man, and his bounty far exceeds hers. So she proposes to basically team up with the bandits so that they could all claim the bounty on Mordecai's head. In response, Mordecai calls his trusty bird, Bloodwing, who then helps him take down Esmeralda. Mordecai then gives the bandits an option. They could either leave him alone and claim Esmeralda's bounty, or he and Bloodwing could just take them all out right then and there. The bandits choose not to mess with Mordecai and take Esmeralda instead. Mordecai then gets his hands on Marcus' cards and considers hitting up the man. Soon enough, Mordecai is also on the bus. Finally, we meet the last of our 4 heroes, Brick, just as he's about to get on Marcus' bus. Upon entering the vehicle, Brick sees that Lilith, Roland, and Mordecai are already on board. Lilith asks him his name, and Brick simply hands her a literal brick. He then takes a seat and his mind wanders to a time long past. In it, we find out that Brick used to belong to a gang of raiders on an unnamed planet. One day, Brick and his crew decided to pillage a town called Burke's Vine. They did so, and it was business as usual until the rest of Brick's gang decided to abduct all of Birch Vine's children and hold them for ransom. Brick's friends then got out of Dodge, but curiously enough, Brick decided to stay in the town until authorities arrived to arrest him. Soon after, Brick was sent to the local jail. His incarceration didn't last long though, as the hulking man easily broke out of prison with his bare hands. Knowing that he wouldn't stand a chance against Brick if he chose to stop him, the jail warden could only ask him where he was going, to which Brick declared that he was going to get all the kidnapped kids from his former gang. Not long after, Brick reached the gang's fortress. One of his former friends, Crush, got all presumptuous and thought that Brick went there to beg for his position back in the gang. But Brick didn't come here to renew his membership. He only had 2 words for his ex-partners in crime: no children. See, Brick might have been a brute, but he had a code. So he ultimately went into a violent rage as he took out each and every one of his former associates before bringing the kidnapped kids back safely. In the aftermath, one of the rescued kids suggested that Brick was the kind of guy who could use a pet dog. In the present, we find out that Brick eventually did heed the kid's advice, as Brick holds his necklace while on the bus, a necklace that has a dog paw pendant. So here we are, 4 otherwise unrelated souls riding on a bus on a desolate planet called Pandora. Borderlands 1, 2865. Lilith, Roland, Mordecai, and Brick continue to ride with Marcus until they reach the Pandoran settlement known as Firestone. When they get there, the quartet mysteriously start getting psychic messages from a lady only referred to as the Guardian Angel. Now, this Guardian Angel's real name is, well, Angel. Lilith and the rest of our heroes don't know this yet, but Angel also happens to be a siren. Specifically, she's the current siren who received the ability to phase shift. Angel is also the daughter of a guy named Handsome Jack. Now, we won't get into Handsome Jack just yet, but you should know that this guy will play an important part in the Borderlands saga as the story goes on. In any case, Angel initially guides Lilith, Roland, Mordecai, and Brick. Soon after, our valiant vault hunters meet a couple of individuals. One of them is Dr. Zed, self-appointed protector of Firestone, and one absolutely shady medical practitioner. Hell, I'm not even sure the guy has a license to be a doctor. On the other hand, Lilith and her gang also meet Claptrap, a robot who basically serves as the gang's trusty NPC friend and one of the Borderlands franchise's most recognizable mascots. From there, Dr. Zed and Claptrap would help our protagonists gain infamy and renown on Pandora by going on missions that basically involve taking out the bandit gangs that have been plaguing the region. It was business as usual for Lilith and her newfound allies until they came across a bandit leader named Sledge. The Vault Hunters eventually managed to take out Sledge, which makes them come into possession of an ancient Eridian artifact, a fragment of the Great Vault's key. This Vault key fragment then opened up a whole new world of trouble and adventure for our heroes. First, there's the acting leader of Atlas Crimson Lance, a woman named Commandant Steele. Also, you should know that Commandant Steele happens to be a siren, but that's beside the point right now. All she wants for now is to get her hands on the Vault key fragment from Lilith's group. So much so that she pretty much imposes martial law on Pandora to acquire it, and any other Eridian artifact that Pandora's remaining settlers might have. Remember Patricia Tanis we talked about before? Yeah, she's still on Pandora, alive and well. And after acquiring the Vault key fragment, our Vault hunting heroes travel to a place called New Haven, one of Pandora's last remaining active human settlements. It's also the place where they meet Patricia. The archaeologist would explain that specific vault that the key fragment was made for only opens once every couple of centuries. On top of that, Lilith and her friends needed to find the 3 other fragments to complete the key and make it usable. Lilith, Roland, Mordecai, and Brick get their hands on the next 2 Vault key fragments soon after meeting Patricia. However, the final fragment proved to be quite a pickle to acquire. At first, our heroes are led to believe that the final piece of the key was with a bandit leader called Baron Flint. However, they soon discover that Patricia lied to them when Commandant Steele contacts the quartet and tells them that there are actually only 3 fragments. And just to make matters worse, Steele and the Crimson Lance managed to take our heroes' key fragments from them. But the truth of the matter is that there are actually 4 Vault key fragments. It's just that the final piece was with Patricia all along. We soon find out that Commandant Steele and the Crimson Lance have taken Patricia to the Crimson Enclave, the Lance's home base. In any case, Steele makes our heroes' jobs even harder when she disables Pandora's EchoNet, the planet's communication system that links its human settlements in the same network that Angel has been using to guide our heroes. Regardless, they soon find themselves sneaking into the Crimson Enclave to link up with Patricia, who reveals that the only reason she lied was because Steele and her people forced her to do so. Along the way, Patricia was also forced to surrender her fragment to Steel. And now that the Commandant is in possession of all the fragments, she and her men promptly headed to the location of the Great Vault with the intention of opening it. Meanwhile, Patricia tells our heroes that they should bring EchoNet back online and prevent Steel from opening the Great Vault at all costs. Lilith and her companions save Patricia and head out to restore EchoNet right after that. They succeed in bringing Pandora's comm systems back online and then proceed to go after Commandant Steel. Lilith, Roland, Mordecai, and Brick arrive at the location of the Great Vault not long after. But they're too late, as Steel has successfully used her Siren abilities to fuse the Vault key fragments and open the Great Vault. And if you remember everything we talked about the Great Vault earlier, you know that it doesn't contain vast Eridian riches. Instead, Steel only managed to successfully unleash the Destroyer from its millennia-long imprisonment. As you'd expect, the Destroyer instantly wreaks havoc the moment it gets out of its cage, starting by taking out Commandant Steel herself. But Lilith, Roland, Mordecai, and Brick pool their strength together to combat the beast until the Destroyer is successfully released in the Great Vault. In the aftermath, our heroes meet up with Patricia again and hand her the Vault key for safekeeping. On the other hand, it's at this point where Angel's location is finally revealed. What's more is that she's been using a satellite owned by a company called Hyperion to reach out to our heroes this whole time. Now, Hyperion is another one of the Borderlands universe's mega corporations. Like Atlas, they also specialize in weapons manufacturing. And in one final twist before the credits roll, another revelation comes up when we find out that Claptrap has been reprogrammed to become the interplanetary ninja assassin. Regardless, with the Destroyer in its cage once again, Lilith, Roland, Mordecai, and Brick live happily ever after. Just kidding. Everything I've told you up until now only spans the first Borderlands game. And that's without the DLCs. The zombie island of Dr. Ned. Soon enough, the 4 Vault Hunters would go on to participate in a bunch of quests. One of them involves a shady dude who calls himself Dr. Ned. Now, Dr. Ned resides in Jacob's Cove, where he was tasked with doing medical work. But given that the world of Borderlands is crazy as hell, Dr. Ned instead managed to raise the dead and create monsters that terrorize the town. So our heroes team up with Dr. Ned in order to help Jacob's Cove get rid of the creatures, only to find out that the dude is the real enemy behind this whole episode. Oh, and there's this running gag that Dr. Ned is just Dr. Zed in disguise. But Gearbox Software, the developer behind the Borderlands series, would ultimately reveal that they're actually 2 different people. Well, they're siblings to be exact. Mad Moxxi's Underdome Riot. Afterwards, we get introduced to a woman named Mad Moxxi. And even if you never played Borderlands before, chances are you probably saw countless fangirls cosplaying as Moxxi during the 2010s, as she was a fairly popular gaming character. In any case, our Vault Hunting gang would find themselves participating in Moxxi's Underdome event, which is basically a gladiatorial challenge arena, the secret armory of General Knoxx. Now, Lilith and the gang's next adventure comes when a guy named General Knoxx, the leader of the Crimson Lance, arrives on Pandora with his battalion after the demise of Commandant Steel. They then set up their home base at a place called the Parched Fathoms. Athena, a Crimson Lance assassin who has recently defected from the unit, gives our heroes a call to entice them about a huge stash of Atlas Corp tech. And soon afterwards, Lilith and the gang travel to a spot called T-Bone Junction to link up with Athena so that they could raid the Crimson Lance's weapons cache. Our heroes don't get to meet Athena yet, but they do get to link up with Scooter, who crafts a ride for them, a Mad Max-inspired truck named the Monster. And on a side note, Scooter's also revealed to be one of Mad Moxxi's kids. From here, Scooter instructs the gang to go look for Moxxi. In order to do that, they're going to have to get past the Crimson Lance's roadblocks, which would then lead the Vault Hunters to Moxxi's location and ultimately to Athena. Soon after, the gang manages to link up with Moxxi at one of the dive bars she owns. The lady tells the crew that a gang of bandits had abducted Athena in order to claim the bounty placed on her head. This is because Athena's defection from the Crimson Lance turned her into a wanted woman on Pandora. Moxxi then hands Lilith and the gang blueprints to an even newer vehicle called the Racer. They eventually build it, and after some skirmishes with Crimson Lance operatives, they discover that Athena is being held at a place called Lockdown Palace. The 4 Vault Hunters reach Lockdown Palace and meet the guy in charge of the facility, Shank, who is scheming to claim Athena's bounty by handing her over to her Crimson Lance. A fight ensues that ultimately leads to Shank's demise, while Lilith and the gang locate Athena at the palace's main cell block. Afterwards, Athena instructs our heroes to acquire a device called an Echo Recorder, which would help them get past the Atlas Armory's code locks and obtain the loot Athena told them about. Long story short, our heroes get their hands on an Echo Recorder and use it to snoop in on a couple of Crimson Lance operatives who couldn't shut their mouths about the Armory's code. Classic video game stuff. They then retrieve the code and meet up with Athena once more, who then hands them a detonator they could use to rack the Atlas weapons cache. So Lilith, Roland, Mordecai, and Brick set out for the Atlas Armory. There they meet the one and only General Knoxx, who they find out has been planning to take himself out using the weapons inside the cache. But in the end, our heroes have a scuffle with Knoxx, and Knoxx gets what he wants either way, as the gang puts him in a body bag in the ensuing confrontation. When the dust settles, Lilith, Roland, Mordecai, and Brick acquire some of that sweet Atlas-made armaments before blowing the entire armory to bits. Claptrap's new robot revolution. Alright, remember the end of the main Borderlands storyline where we saw Claptrap turn into a so-called interplanetary ninja assassin? Well, this plays off in the final story DLC for the first Borderlands game, called Claptrap's New Robot Revolution. As we learn, the reason behind Claptrap's sudden heel turn was brought on by none other than the Hyperion Corporation, who reprogrammed good old Claptrap to hunt down and take out Lilith, Roland, Mordecai, and Brick. However, Hyperion's plans to assassinate our Vault Hunters blow up in their faces when ninja assassin Claptrap goes rogue after realizing that his fellow units are being mistreated by humans. So, ninja assassin Claptrap decided to change his prime directive from taking out the 4 Vault Hunters to eliminating all of humanity. From there, ninja assassin Claptrap banded with all the other Claptrap units he could find to mount a robot uprising against the human race, an initiative he calls the Robolution. In response, Hyperion is forced to contact Lilith and the gang and hire them to take down ninja assassin Claptrap. Along the way, Claptrap would repurpose fallen villains that the 4 Vault Hunters had faced in the past, like Commandant Steele and General Knoxx, augmenting them with so-called Claptrap parts to increase their combat capabilities. But in the end, Lilith and the gang are able to track down ninja assassin Claptrap. As you'd expect, a fight ensues, and it ends with Claptrap and his army being brought back to their original programming. Now, one final thing to note before we head over to the next mainline Borderlands installment is that a mysterious element called Iridium started to appear across Pandora after the Great Vault was opened. If you remember from earlier, Iridium is this mineral that Sirens use to augment their abilities. More importantly though, the existence of Iridium piqued Hyperion's interest, which then made them set up shop with Pandora's star system. There are also a couple of prose novels set around this period, namely Borderlands Unconquered and Borderlands Gunsight. We won't focus too much on either of these books, but suffice it to say that both stories center around Roland, Brick, Mordecai, and a woman named Daphne, who pretty much becomes the leading lady of the piece instead of Lilith. Unlike Lilith though, Daphne used to be an infamous hitwoman for the various underworld organizations of the galaxy instead of a siren. This whole adventure doesn't necessarily play a huge role in Borderlands' overarching lore, but it does involve all the usual elements you'd expect in an entry into the series. That is to say, it has guns and violence. Borderlands, the pre-sequel, 2866. Although Borderlands, the pre-sequel, was released after Borderlands 2, chronologically it takes place prior to the events of that game, so we're gonna cover it first. Here, we're introduced to a whole new gang of main characters. One of them happens to be Athena. Yes, the same Athena from that whole deal with General Knoxx. Then there's Nisha, who's the sheriff of a town called Lynchwood and Handsome Jack's eventual romantic partner. Wilhelm, a cybernetically enhanced mercenary. And then there's Claptrap. Yes, it's the same Claptrap we met in the first game. Just to shed more light on this cute little bot, the reason we see him here is because Claptrap and his fellow Claptrap bots are actually manufactured by the Hyperion Corporation, which has a large role in this upcoming tale. Apart from those 4, we're also introduced to Timothy Lawrence, Handsome Jack's body double, and Aurelia, a 1%er who is also the heiress to the Hammerlock fortune. Speaking of Handsome Jack, this particular game is also where we get to finally dive into this guy's deep history. Our story begins a couple of years after the events of the first Borderlands game. Athena has started working as a mercenary after defecting from the Crimson Lance. She receives a call from a guy named Jack who tasks her with locating an Iridian vault on Elpis, Pandora's moon. Jack, during this period, works as a programmer for Hyperion. Athena meets up with other Vault Hunters like Nisha, Wilhelm, Aurelia, Timothy, and Claptrap, and they all board a ship headed for Helios, a space station owned by the Hyperion Corporation, which is in Moon's orbit. Now, remember Colonel Zarpedon and her crew of defected doll operatives who settled on Elpis and decided they'd protect its Eridian vault? Well, they make an appearance here, as they interrupt Athena and her group's trip to Helios when they ambush their ship on its way to Helios. Still, the ship is able to make a rough landing on the moon base where Athena and the group meet Jack shortly after. They all decide to hit back Zarpedon and the Lost Legion using Helios' own weapons. However, the group soon discovers that this is a no-go, because Helios systems are being blocked by a signal hailing from Elpis itself. This especially prevents them from teleporting between Helios and Elpis. With no other option, the group decides to flee Helios the old-fashioned way. But this falls flat when Zarpedon intercepts them, accompanied by an alien companion. So Jack decides to buy Athena and the group some time by holding off their assailants long enough for the crew to board an escape ship that will take them to Elpis. Soon after, our heroes reach Elpis, where they meet a scrap dealer named Janie Springs. Janie leads them to a settlement called Concordia, where Athena and the gang link up with Mad Moxxi, Lilith, and Roland to ask for assistance in deactivating the signal preventing Helios from using its built-in defense system. Oh, and if you were wondering how Moxxi plays a part in all this, she turns out to be Jack's ex-lover. The group soon learns that the blocking signal was activated by a sleazebag known as the Marif. The Marif's real name is Huckster T. Meredith. He used to work for Hyperion. In fact, he was one of Jack's direct subordinates. However, Huckster eventually defected from Hyperion and cut a deal with Zarpedon and the Lost Legion, which involved Huckster sharing confidential Hyperion information with Zarpedon in exchange for money, power, and influence. This arrangement ultimately led to Huckster becoming both the mayor and sheriff of Concordia. You know, the Marif. Anyway, the group manages to deactivate Marif's signal, which then allows Jack to teleport himself out of Helios and towards Elpis. Once there, Jack discovers Marif's real identity. On the other hand, Zarpedon is dead set in not letting anyone near the Eridian vault on Elpis. So, to stop Jack and his crew from doing that, she tries to use the space station's main weapon, called the Eye of Helios, to wreck all of Elpis. Because if Zarpedon can't protect the vault, then she might as well destroy the entire moon. Yeah, makes sense. Ultimately, Jack takes out Huckster when the scumbag tries to attack him in spite of Jack's willingness to let him go. After that, Jack comes up with a plan to craft an army made up of bots to help him regain control of Helios. To help him in this mission, Athena and her team go to one of the Lost Legion's strongholds to get their hands on a piece of military AI tech. There, they learn that one of the base's leaders, Felicity, is the same piece of tech that they've been looking for. Afterwards, the group makes their way to an old robot manufacturing plant owned by the Doll Corporation. Jack enlists the help of a Hyperion scientist named Gladstone to create his mechanical army. Gladstone agrees and presents them with the Constructor, a robot specifically designed to, well, create more robots. Now, Felicity is hesitant to basically become part of a bloody war between Jack and the Lost Legion, so she instead suggests that they create a copy of her that they could install in the Constructor so that they could proceed with their plans without compromising her moral integrity. But it's also here that we see Jack becoming slowly corrupted by his own ambitions. Believing that creating a copy of Felicity would halt their progress, he orders Athena and the rest of the group to force Felicity to become the Constructor's AI. This causes Felicity to rebel against Jack and his crew. So she takes control of the Constructor, and a fight between her and Jack's group ensues. Sadly, Felicity is taken down, resulting in the deletion of her personality from the Constructor. And from there, Jack is finally able to build his robot army. Soon after, Jack, his Vault Hunter crew, his fresh robot army, and our old pals Mad Moxxi, Lilith, and Roland get back to Helios to finally spring their plan of retaking the space station. When they get there, Jack descends further into paranoia, as he starts to suspect Gladstone and his men to be spies working for Zarpedon, so he takes them all out. Meanwhile, Athena and the rest of the group come face to face with Zarpedon and bring her down before meeting her end, though Zarpedon tells them the exact location of the vault on Elpis. The group then rushes to the Eye of Helios to prevent it from firing on Elpis. It's here they find out that the Eye of Helios is actually the literal eye of the Destroyer. Yes, that Destroyer from the first game. aka the monster that could destroy the universe. As it turns out, Jack was able to get hold of the Destroyer's eye at some point, which he then proceeded to weaponize. Now Lilith, Roland, and Moxxi know just how much bad news this means, so they turn on Jack and wreck the Eye of Helios before making it out of there. In addition to that, Lilith, Roland, and Moxxi plan on getting to the vault on Elpis before Jack and his team could do so, knowing all too well that Jack's not going to do something evil once he gets whatever's inside it. Remember, the trio now knows full well that Jack has gone absolutely nuts with power at this point. Of course, Jack doesn't take kindly to this and immediately seeks his revenge against them. As soon as the three leave for Elpis, Jack and his crew follow suit in an attempt to reach the vault first and at the same time hunt down Lilith, Roland, and Moxxi. Their search eventually leads them to their primary goal, the Eridian vault on Elpis, which is also known as Elisir, which is also known as Elessir. However, they find that it has already been opened. Still, Jack and his crew manage to spot the three vault hunters and defeat them before heading further into the vault. Eventually, they reach the Sentinel, the ancient guardian of the vault that the Eridians placed there long ago. So Jack and the group are forced to deal with it, and after a fierce battle, Jack and his group end up on top. From there, Jack travels further into the vault only to find out that it contained no treasure at all. Instead, he comes across a weird insignia floating in the air, and when Jack gets close to it, he starts seeing visions of a dragon-like creature. This creature is known as the Warrior, and like Jack himself, it's going to play a large role in future installments of the Borderlands saga. But for now, all we'll say is that the Warrior is another one of the Eridians' ancient inventions. Back to the story at hand. Jack's vision quest is cut short when Lilith appears out of nowhere and uses the same symbol to brand Jack's face, before making a quick exit using a teleporter. Now disfigured, Jack fully loses it and goes absolutely nuts. He swears he'll take out Lilith one day. Not just that, but he's so far in the deep end that he basically brands any and all vault hunters from Pandora his enemies. On the other hand, Athena realizes that Jack has gone all loco and decides to cut ties with him. In the aftermath, we find out what happens to Jack and the rest of his crew. For one, we learn that both Nisha and Wilhelm decided to stay with Jack. They basically become a couple of his prized enforcers. Wilhelm gets more cybernetic upgrades and is sent to Pandora not long after, where he terrorized and destroyed the town of New Haven. On the other hand, Nisha is assigned as the sheriff of Lynchwood and soon starts a relationship with Jack. There's Timothy too, who also chose to continue working for Jack. As for Athena, she refuses the payment that Jack originally promised for her services and gets out of Elpis right after that. Claptrap meets a darker end when we find out that Jack screwed him over. That is to say, Jack destroyed Claptrap and left the little guy for dead. But don't worry, we'll get to see more of this robotic mascot in the future. Finally, there's Jack. After all the events of this story, Jack has fully turned into a maniac. He starts calling himself Handsome Jack and starts wearing a mask to hide the scar Lilith gave him at the Elpis vault. More importantly, Handsome Jack is about to take out Harold Tassiter, the head honcho of the Hyperion Corporation. From there, Jack usurps Harold's role and becomes Hyperion's newest CEO, Claptastic Voyage. Handsome Jack then finds out about the H-Source not long after his hostile takeover of the Hyperion Corporation. Now, H-Source is best described as this top-secret dossier and program that contains the company's most confidential files. The problem is that it's also hidden within a Claptrap unit, but not just any unit. The H-Source is somewhere inside Claptrap's mainframe. You know, the same Claptrap that Jack screwed over after he went nuts? Still, Jack's willing to do anything to get his hands on the H-Source. So he brings his old team back together. Yes, even Athena, because a girl has to make ends meet. And shortly after, he creates digital copies of our heroes and sends them inside Claptrap's mainframe to look for the H-Source. Along the way, they accidentally activate a program within Claptrap called Shadow Trap, which turns the cute little robot into an evil version of himself. Ultimately though, the group manages to take it down and retrieve the H-Source. They then hand it over to Jack, who does something super scummy. He uses the H-Source's code to destroy each and every Claptrap unit that exists in the universe. However, the Claptrap, the same one we've known since the first game, manages to survive this purge when his Shadow Trap programming sacrifices itself in order to allow Claptrap to live. So Claptrap survives, which eventually allows him to meet a guy named Alistair Hammerlock, aka Sir Hammerlock. And if you're wondering, yes, this guy and Aurelia are related. They're siblings. Alistair would go on to fix Claptrap and make him operational again. As for Athena, we find out that she eventually shacked up with Janie, they left Elpis and settled on the Pandoran town called Hollow Point not long after. Oh, and Athena continued working as a hired gun even after her crappy experiences with Jack. Aurelia, on the other hand, realized that Jack has one too many screws loose and ultimately leaves his side too. Borderlands 2, 2870. Borderlands 2 takes place around 3 years after the events of the pre-sequel. Suffice it to say that a lot of things happened in the intervening years. For one, remember Iridium? That mysterious mineral that suddenly appeared on Pandora when the Destroyer was unleashed? Well, Handsome Jack learned that Iridium was a perfect power source for all the insane super weapons he was building. So he made moves to take control of Pandora and harvest all the Iridium he could get his crazy hands on. Along the way, Lilith also discovered that Iridium could augment her siren abilities, so she started absorbing the mineral into her body. More than that, the original Vault Hunter team from the first Borderlands game have pretty much become Pandora's defenders in the intervening years. Also, we find out that Atlas ultimately abandoned the Crimson Lances stationed on Pandora after the demise of General Knoxx. In turn, Roland, Lilith, Mordecai, and Brick united the stranded soldiers under one banner called the Crimson Raiders. Oh, and Brick actually got himself a furry canine friend along the way. Sweet, right? Well, hold on to your horses because things are about to take a dark turn from here. It all started when Handsome Jack began his conquest of Pandora. First, he installed Nisha to take over the Pandoran town called Lynchwood, and from there, he, Nisha, and Wilhelm would set themselves upon New Haven. Lilith, Roland, Mordecai, and Brick tried to stop them, but this didn't end very well for them. On one hand, Handsome Jack did something absolutely low, even by his standards. He took out Brick's pet dog. From there, Wilhelm managed to defeat the 4 Vault Hunters before eliminating each and every New Haven resident. Understandably, Brick's mental and emotional state was shaken by this whole debacle. So much so that he ended up killing a Hyperion lackey that their team was supposed to interrogate in order to find Jack. This ultimately caused a rift among the 4 OG Vault Hunters. Roland would boot Brick out of the team, while Mordecai became increasingly withdrawn from the rest of the team. Still, Lilith and Roland continued to mount a resistance against Jack and his lackeys. But it wasn't enough. By the time Borderlands 2's story begins, the Crimson Raiders only had one stronghold called the Sanctuary that Jack hasn't gotten to yet. So yeah, Jack pretty much conquered Pandora and started calling himself the planet's supreme ruler. And true to his word that he would annihilate any Vault Hunter he could find, he started broadcasting messages across the galaxy that enticed Vault Hunters to check out Pandora. Jack and his men would then take them out whenever anyone answered the message and arrived on the planet. Now, Borderlands 2's main storyline promptly begins when a group of Vault Hunters from across the galaxy answers one of Handsome Jack's messages and boards a ship going to Pandora, with no idea that they're walking straight into the trap. Here, we're introduced to 6 new main characters, each with an interesting backstory of their own. First, there's Axton, a guy who used to be part of Dahl's own unit. Similar to Roland, Axton was a sergeant back when he was on active duty for the company. However, he eventually pissed off his superiors due to his rebellious streak. It also didn't help that one of his commanding officers, Sarah, happened to be his wife. So when Axton left his post in Dahl, the company marked him for execution. This prompted Sarah to basically tell her husband to escape to the world outside of Dahl's sphere of influence. From then on, Axton started working as a mercenary. Next, there's Maya. Maya is a siren gifted with the ability to phase lock. She grew up on the planet Athenas, where she was basically revered as a god by a cult called the Order of the Impending Storm. Now, the acolytes of the occult were overprotective of Maya growing up, which only further sparked her interest to get out of Athenas and learn more about her siren heritage. At some point, Maya learned that the Order of the Impending Storm was using her reputation and title as a siren to shake down Athena's citizens. So she rebelled against the cult and even took out one of its members, Brother Sophus. From there, Maya denounced the Order of the Impending Storm and finally fulfilled her dream of traveling to Pandora to discover more about the Sirens. The third of our new heroes is Salvador, a stocky man who has a love for big guns and shooting his enemies with it. Salvador is a Pandoran native. He hails from a town called Ovages, where he eventually found himself catching the ire of its inhabitants. Things got so bad that they sentenced him to death by firing squad. But due to a stroke of good luck, Hyperion agents stormed Ovages just as he was about to get executed. Afterwards, Salvador went on a rampage and nearly took out every Hyperion soldier who attacked the town, all except for one. The lone survivor told him all about a supposed Eridian vault on Pandora, which piqued Salvador's interest. Then there's Zero. Now, not much is known about Zero. In fact, no one even knows if he's male or female. much less a person or a robot. What we do know is that Zero is one of the more infamous professional assassins in the Borderlands universe. And the reason they came to Pandora was because they thought that whatever was inside the planet's rumored vault was a worthy challenge for them. Now, the next 2 Vault Hunters that we'll be introducing aren't necessarily from the base Borderlands 2 game. Rather, they're characters that players could get via DLC content. Regardless, they're part of the saga's canon. One of them is a girl named Gage. She hails from a planet called Eden 5, where she lived a pretty normal life. She had loving parents and happened to be sort of a tech whiz. Things started to go south for Gage when her sworn rival, a girl named Marcy Holloway, stole the blueprints to one of her inventions, Project Deathtrap, and used it to compete in their school's science fair. But here's the thing, Marcy was only able to steal a blueprint for an earlier version of Project Deathtrap. On the other hand, Gage was able to participate in the science fair using a much more refined version of the same project. Still, Marcy ended up winning the science fair with the help of her daddy's cash. But this wasn't enough for the brat, so she tried starting a physical altercation with Gage. This sparked Gage's Deathtrap unit to mark Marcy as an enemy, and it then proceeded to pop Marcy like a pimple. This whole mess got Gage arrested. However, her dad came to the rescue, and with his help, Gage was able to escape Eden 5's authorities. The two then said their goodbyes, and Gage decided to go to Pandora and start working as a Vault Hunter. Finally, there's Krieg. Krieg is a psycho, which in the Borderlands universe means he's a person who underwent brutal, inhumane experiments. Don't let his looks fool you though. Krieg has perhaps one of the most tragic backstories in all of Borderlands. For one, he grew up with a mother who didn't have any love for him. Eventually, Krieg started working as a bounty hunter, but this career was cut short when Hyperion agents abducted him and turned Krieg into one of their lab rats. From there, a scientist named Dr. Benedict started doing experiments on Krieg to turn him into a psycho. Now, this process always ends in death. However, due to Krieg's indomitable will, he was able to break free from captivity. Not only that, but he managed to take out Benedict and even free the other test subjects the scummy doctor had captured. Still, the damage had been done. Benedict's experiments made Krieg develop an unstable psyche. So from then on, Krieg lived with a split personality, one belonging to his more sane, stable side and the other to his murderous, impulsive psycho persona. Now, although any typical psycho would attack anyone they came across, Krieg was able to rein in his impulses and focus his outbursts on people who he thought deserved it, like bandits or anyone else threatening innocent lives. Krieg even found himself becoming a part of the Crimson Raiders at one point, but he left the group sometime later after he realized most members of the militia only saw him as a mindless psycho. However, just to prove that Krieg is a 100% stand-up dude, his first appearance actually saw him helping Maya take down a horde of rats in the Pandoran wastelands. You could even say that the reason he ultimately joined the other Vault Hunters was because he had a huge crush on her. With the introductions out of the way, Borderlands 2's story begins when Jack's Hyperion agents attack the train that these 6 Vault Hunters are riding in. They manage to fend off their assailants, but their vehicle ultimately crashes in a place called Windshear Waste. There, they're suddenly contacted by none other than Angel, who offers to lend them a hand in bringing down Handsome Jack. They also meet the one and only Claptrap, who has since been rebuilt by Alistair Hammerlock. Claptrap then assists the gang and tells them how to go to a town called Liarsburg so that they could meet up with Alistair. The Vault Hunters do so and help Alistair deal with the town's bandit problem after meeting him. From there, our heroes head for the Sanctuary, aka the Crimson Raiders stronghold. Once they get there, the group learns that Roland has been kidnapped by Firehawk, who's a big-time bandit on Pandora. So, the group sets out to look for Firehawk and rescue Roland, only to find out that Firehawk is none other than Lilith. On a side note, Lilith and Roland actually got into a relationship soon after the events of the first game. But by the time Borderlands 2 kicks off, they'd broken up so that they could focus on managing their militia. Back to our story. Lilith tells the 6 Vault Hunters that Roland is actually being held by a bandit gang. So our heroes confront them and ultimately save Roland. Once they're back in the Sanctuary, Roland informs the crew that Handsome Jack has managed to steal the vault key they handed Patricia way back in the epilogue of the first game. Right now, the vault key is on a Hyperion-operated train, so Roland instructs the group to bring the artifact back to them. The 6 Vault Hunters go on this mission and successfully ambush the train. However, they fail to locate the vault key and instead come face to face with one of Handsome Jack's enforcers, Wilhelm. A scuffle ensues and our heroes take out Wilhelm, and even when they failed to get the vault key, our heroes get a consolation prize in the form of Wilhelm's energy core. Roland then proposes that they use Wilhelm's core as a battery that would power the Sanctuary's defense systems. However, that doesn't happen, and instead Angel uses the core to hack into the Sanctuary's systems and sabotage it. It's here that we learn that Angel is actually aligned with Handsome Jack. This causes the Sanctuary's shields to fail, leaving the entire town open for Jack to carpet bomb from his orbital space station. Fortunately, Lilith is able to use her Siren abilities to defend the entire Sanctuary from Jack's attack. It's also revealed that the Sanctuary isn't just an ordinary town, it's actually a spaceship. In the end, our heroes are able to escape by teleporting the Sanctuary away from its original location. In the aftermath, Angel contacts our heroes once more and pretty much tells them that Handsome Jack forced her to work for him. She then swore to cut her ties with the man and continue helping the Vault Hunters. Now, remember that vision Jack had when he entered the vault on Alpus back in Borderlands, the pre-sequel? Well, the vision didn't only show him images of the creature known as the Warrior, it also revealed where Jack could find this creature, which happens to be within yet another vault on Pandora. Before we move on with our story, you should learn a bit of background about the Warrior. This creature was originally created by the Eridians as a defense mechanism against anyone who dared threaten Pandora. It was created even before the Eridians finished crafting the Great Vault. In fact, millennia ago, a fringe group of Eridian rebels who worshipped the Destroyer tried to prevent the completion of the Great Vault, which prompted the other Eridians to unleash the Warrior in order to defeat them. Afterwards, they sealed the creature back in its vault. Back to our story. Handsome Jack plans to use the vault key to set the Warrior free and use it as his personal superweapon. However, the vault key only becomes usable once every couple of centuries. This explains why Handsome Jack has been hoarding Iridium this whole time, to bypass the key's 200-year rule and manually charge it with the minerals so that he could open the vault as soon as possible. Angel tells our heroes that the vault key is actually in her possession, deep within one of Hyperion's bases. So the 6 Vault Hunters enlist the help of our old pals Brick and Mordecai to storm the Hyperion stronghold. Lilith and Roland also accompany them and they ambush the place. They eventually come face to face with Angel and learn that she's a Siren. Not only that, but she also happens to be Jack's daughter. Angel reveals that her dad is forcing her to use her Siren abilities to charge the key with energy from Iridium. However, Angel wasn't lying when she said she didn't like working for her crazy father. This is why she tells our heroes that they could stop Jack by ending her life. Jack tries to prevent this from happening, but our heroes ultimately manage to destroy the machine, keeping Angel alive. Problem solved, right? Well, I hope you're ready for this, because what happens next is pretty huge. After taking out Angel, the group is taken by surprise when Jack shoots Roland in the back and kills the guy. Not only that, but Jack manages to subdue Lilith and attempt to use her siren powers to take out the rest of her friends. Fortunately, Lilith is a quick thinker, so she successfully teleports the rest of the group back to the home base. Still, Lilith is held hostage, and Jack plans on using her as a replacement for Angel in charging the vault key. Despite the differences they've had in the past, of course Mordecai and Brick wouldn't let Jack go free after what he did to Roland and Lilith. So they begin making preparations to stop Jack. The 6 Vault Hunters then go on a mission to identify the location of the vault from a Hyperion facility. They reach the vault soon after, and as you'd expect, a fight ensues between Jack and our heroes. The group is able to subdue Jack, but he still manages to use the vault key to unleash the Warrior. The Vault Hunters band together to take out the Warrior before finally putting a stop to Jack. With all the threats gone, Lilith decides to destroy the key to prevent anyone else from accessing world-ending threats like the Destroyer or the Warrior. She proceeds to do this, but Lilith makes a mistake and instead inadvertently causes the key to open its database. This reveals the location of all the other Iridian vaults peppered throughout the universe. Captain Scarlett and her pirate's booty. Not long after the fall of Handsome Jack, the 6 Vault Hunters would go on a new adventure when they meet a sand pirate named Captain Scarlett. Scarlett tells them about a long-lost cache of riches called Captain Blade's Lost Treasure, and together they go in search of it. They eventually locate the treasure's location only for Scarlett to reveal her true colors. She then betrays the group in an attempt to claim the treasure for herself. However, they all get swallowed up by the treasure's guardian called the Leviathan. The 6 Vault Hunters then get into it with Scarlett while inside the creature's stomach and ultimately take out the pirate captain. Afterwards, the group deals with the Leviathan and discovers that Captain Blade's treasure is hidden inside the beast too. Mr. Torgue's Campaign of Carnage. It's also in Borderlands 2 that we meet Tiny Tina. Now, Tiny Tina would eventually go on to become one of the series' most recognizable characters. And just to give you a bit of background, she's this mentally unstable 13-year-old girl who also happens to be an explosive specialist. Tiny Tina is more of a side character during her appearance in the main Borderlands 2 campaign, but she soon becomes a standout starting with the second DLC of the game, called Mr. Torgue's Campaign of Carnage. In this one, Patricia and a guy named Mr. Torgue find out about the location of a new Eridian vault on Pandora. This vault had a security system in place where only the so-called Champion of Pandora feeds it the blood of the ultimate coward. This vault is located in a place called the Badass Crater of Badassitude. Yeah, I'm not kidding you with that one. In any case, Mr. Torgue decides to hold a competition to determine the quote-unquote ultimate badass of Pandora so that they could open the vault. Our heroes participate in this competition and go through a gauntlet of various bosses. Along the way, they also come across the event sponsor, Moxxi, who then tells the group to go to Tiny Tina so that she could help them train. By the end of this tale, our heroes find their ultimate coward in the form of a guy named Piston, a scumbag who likes to cheat his way through the tournament. Long story short, the Vault Hunters defeat Piston and literally spill his blood on the vault, which then allows it to open and grant our heroes with tons of new loot. Sir Hammerlock's big game hunt. Sometime later, Alistair Hammerlock invites the Vault Hunters to join him to hunt exotic creatures at a place called Ergris. Everything was going smoothly until they came across a man named Nakayama. Now, Nakayama is a scientist working for Hyperion and is an absolute fan of Handsome Jack. Given that the Vault Hunters played a part in Jack's death, Nakayama has sworn revenge on the group and uses his squads of Handsome Jack clones to take them down. In the end, however, Nakayama dies as pathetically as he lived, by falling down a flight of stairs after making his presence known to our heroes. Without getting too ahead of ourselves, Nakayama's lifeless body would end up in the hands of a guy named Shade, who then used it as one of his attractions at an exhibit called the World of Curiosities. This little detail will play a rather large part in the future of the Borderlands saga, so keep it in mind. Tiny Tina's assault on Dragon Keep. Not long after, Tiny Tina takes center stage in the story when she invites Borderlands surviving OG heroes to join her in a game of bunkers and badasses, which is best described as the Borderlands universe version of Dungeons & Dragons. Now, this particular storyline is less about universe-ending threats and vault hunting than it is about Tiny Tina coming to terms with the death of her friend, Roland. The long and short of it is that the Vault Hunters play a campaign of B&B, where Tiny Tina serves as its bunker master. The young girl crafts a story reimagining Roland's confrontation with Handsome Jack, wherein Roland ends up surviving. In the end, though, Lilith, Mordecai, and Brick help Tiny Tina face the truth that Roland is truly gone. It's equal parts heart-wrenching and uncharacteristically grounded for a Borderlands story. Regardless, we find out that our heroes have erected a monument for their fallen friend by the end of this tale, as they pay it a visit and Tiny Tina says goodbye to him. But make no mistake, this is not the last time we get to play a tabletop RPG set within the Borderlands universe. That's because the next chronological Borderlands entry comes in the form of a standalone spin-off title centered around Tiny Tina and her favorite game, Bunkers and Badasses. This one is called Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. Here, Tiny Tina manages to rope in a trio of new adventurers to participate in another round of B&B. There's Fret, a former accounting robot who has since become the companion of the second B&B player, Valentine, a self-proclaimed ace pilot. Oh, and the third player in Tina's campaign happens to be you, the player, who she refers to as the Fate Maker. As with the whole B&B campaign that preceded it, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands doesn't really go for Borderlands' usual vault hunting stuff. Instead, this one revolves around a fictional B&B story that Tina comes up with, which is Fret, Valentine, and the Fate Maker battling a villain known as the Dragon Lord. Now, we won't get too much into it, but what you should know is that the Dragon Lord was once a player character within Borderlands B&B universe called the Dragon Knight. In fact, the Dragon Knight used to be Tiny Tina's avatar back when she was first introduced to the joys of this tabletop RPG by none other than Roland. However, Tina messed up during her campaign as the Dragon Knight, which then made her come up with the Dragon Lord. This also led to Tina swearing to only play as a bunker master from then on. By the end of their B&B campaign, Fret, Valentine, and the Fate Maker managed to defeat the Dragon Lord and trap him in a prison for a couple of centuries. In the quote-unquote real Borderlands world, Tina and her friends continue to enjoy playing B&B. Next, there's Tina's Wonderlands, Land of the Giants. As you'd expect, it's another adventure set in one of the quirky teenagers' Bunkers and Badasses campaigns alongside her friends Fret, Valentine, Alistair, and Claptrap. Tales from the Borderlands, 2871. Now, the next mainland Borderlands entry couldn't be more different than the rest of the games in the series, at least gameplay-wise. This one is titled Tales from the Borderlands. It's developed by Telltale Games. And if you're familiar with these guys, you know that they specialize in interactive storytelling instead of Borderlands' usual looter-shooter mechanics. As such, Tales from the Borderlands plays as a choose-your-own-adventure type game where you, the player, determines certain parts of the plot, such as who lives and who dies. As such, it's a bit tricky to identify which parts of this game are considered canon. Tales from the Borderlands happens in the aftermath of Borderlands 2, although we don't get a specific timeline for this. What we do know is that by the time the events of this game begin, Shade had already taken Nakayama's corpse to display it at his museum. Additionally, we learn that Handsome Jack's demise led to a power struggle within the Hyperion Corporation, as its surviving bigwigs fought for top position in the company. Eventually, a man named Saul Henderson successfully replaced Jack as Hyperion's CEO. Our story begins in the underground city of Hollow Point, where we meet Felix, Sasha, and Fiona. Fiona and Sasha are Felix's adopted daughters, and this trio are career swindlers. Their latest grift involves selling a fake vault key that Felix had recently created. After he finishes crafting the fake key, Felix hands it over to Fiona, who then gives it to Sasha and her romantic partner August. Somewhere else, we meet a Hyperion employee named Reese. He's right in the thick of the company's corporate ladder and wants nothing more than to climb it. However, his hopes for a promotion are dashed when he discovers that a Hyperion bigwig named Hugo Vasquez has just taken out the company's current CEO, Saul Henderson. Reese witnesses Hugo disposing of Saul's body and gets spotted in the process. So Hugo gives Reese a huge demotion, turning him from a middle manager to assistant vice janitor. However, in the middle of this confrontation, Hugo couldn't shut his mouth and inadvertently informs Reese about an upcoming deal he has that involves a vault key. If you can't already tell, Hugo is referring to the fake key that Felix, Sasha, and Fiona are looking to sell to him. As revenge for doing him dirty, Reese comes up with a plan to screw over Hugo by completing the deal for the vault key on his own. To do this, Reese enlists the help of a couple of his buddies, Yvette and Vaughn. They soon head to Pandora and visit Shade's museum. They're not here for good old-fashioned tourism though, because this is where the deal for the key is supposed to happen. Along the way, Reese and Vaughn come across Nakayama's corpse. Upon seeing it, Reese is able to acquire a microchip from Nakayama's stuffed body. Shade then approaches the two and links them up with Sasha and August so that they could proceed with the deal for the vault key. However, things go south for Reese and his crew when a bandit named Bossa Nova crashes into the museum, followed by the one and only Zero, who happens to be hunting down Bossa Nova. The ensuing chaos destroys the fake vault key. To make matters worse, Bossa Nova gets his hands on the money that was supposed to be used to pay for the key and runs away with it. So Reese and Vaughn try to go after the thief by stealing Felix's vehicle. Things don't go their way as Felix and his daughters end up subduing Reese and Vaughn. However, the duo convinces the three swindlers to team up with them so that they could reclaim the money together. They seal the deal and promptly make moves to track down their loot. To do this, Reese uses the microchip he stole from Nakayama's body and inserts it in his head. He passes out while Vaughn does something useful and pings the location of the money at an old Atlas facility. Soon after, we find out that Bossa Nova plans on using the money he stole as a prize for a racing tournament he organized. However, Bossa Nova's event is cut short when Zero catches up to him and puts him in a body bag. This opens up an opportunity for Reese's group to grab the suitcase containing the money. However, Felix screws all of them over, even his daughters, when he takes the suitcase for himself. Now, this part of the story can go two ways depending on the player's in-game choices. On one hand, Felix meets his end when it's revealed that the suitcase has been fitted with a bomb and it blows up in his hands. In the other scenario, Felix escapes after throwing away the suitcase. In either case, Reese and the rest of the group don't get the money. The group then decides to make the most out of the situation, so they start looking for any valuables they can find inside Bossa Nova's hideout. Eventually, Reese comes across a room that's packed with Atlas Core loot. He and Fiona grab a pair of trinkets and soon discover the location of an Eridian vault when they link the two artifacts together. All of a sudden, Reese is shocked when a hologram of Handsome Jack appears in front of them. It turns out that the chip he stole from Nakayama contained a record of Jack's own consciousness. Jack then tells the group that they've uncovered the Gortys Project. And if you remember the Gortys Project from earlier on in the video, you know that this initiative was specifically founded to look for Eridian vaults on Pandora. This discovery leads Reese, Vaughn, Fiona, and Sasha to dig deeper into the Gortys Project. They decide to head for Old Haven, where an old hidden Atlas facility is located in hopes of getting some answers. However, both Reese and Vaughn are separated from the group when Hyperion's space station, Helios, bombards them. Reese and Vaughn end up in Pandora's Desert, where they're eventually confronted by Hugo, who wants nothing more than to kick Reese's butt for messing up his deal. Hugo attacks the two, but they're able to escape with the help of Jack's hologram and the trusty loader bot. Meanwhile, Fiona and Sasha decide to head back to Hollow Point for the time being so that they could get their vehicle repaired. The girls then go to Scooter, who repairs their ride, and the girls pay their old house a visit. There, Fiona and Sasha find out that the reason Felix screwed them over was because he was trying to protect them from Valerie, who happens to be August's mom, boss, and a powerful bandit leader. All of a sudden, the girls are attacked by Finch and Kroger, a couple of Valerie's thugs. Fiona and Sasha manage to escape, only to be hounded by Athena, who's also after them. Again, the girls are able to escape and link up with Reese and Vaughn. Afterwards, the group decides to make their way to Old Haven. They reach Old Haven and discover the secret Atlas facility soon after that. However, the group are also ambushed by August and Hugo when they get there. The bad guys manage to subdue Sasha and Vaughn while Fiona and Reese make their way deeper into the facility. Shortly after, Fiona and Reese locate a machine which fuses the artifacts they got from Boss and Nova's hideout before crafting a mysterious sphere called the Gortys. Reese then triggers the building's defense systems, which activates combat drones that end up clashing with August and his crew. Reese and Fiona manage to link up with Vaughn and Sasha in the ensuing chaos, and the group gets out of Dodge. However, they come across more trouble while they escape the Atlas facility when Valerie blocks their path. Here we find out that Valerie was the one who set up the original deal with Hugo. At the same time, Hugo and August catch up to Valerie, and she takes out Hugo. Valerie then threatens the group that she's going to execute Fiona if they don't hand over Gortys to her. Before she can pull the trigger though, Athena appears out of nowhere and attacks Valerie. This forces Valerie, August, and their gang to retreat. We then find out that Felix had hired Athena to keep an eye on his daughters. Afterwards, Fiona fidgets with Gortys, causing it to awaken. The group then finds out that it's a robot that Atlas designed to look for the location of a specific vault called the Vault of the Traveler. Unlike other Eridian vaults, the Vault of the Traveler isn't situated in a single spot. Instead, it continually changes its location by teleporting across the galaxy. Gortys has the ability to ping his vault's location. However, Gortys can only do this if she gets a few much-needed upgrades. From here, Athena decides to help out the group as they travel to another Atlas facility where Gortys can get the first component for her upgrade. During their trip, Jack's consciousness forms a shaky partnership with Reese. The group eventually reaches the Atlas facility where they meet Cassius, a scientist working for the company. However, things get rough for our heroes when Valerie appears and goes after them, which forces the crew to split up. In the meantime, August attempts to take Gortys, which prompts Reese, Sasha, and Loaderbot to rescue their new robotic companion. While this is happening, Fiona meets up with Athena, who's engaged in a duel against none other than Mordecai and Brick. The two OG Vault Hunters subdue Athena and Fiona, and soon after, Valerie is able to capture the rest of the group, except for Vaughn. We then find out that Valerie hired Brick and Mordecai to deal with Athena. With nearly all our main guys and girls captured, Valerie forces Gortys to reveal the location of her second and final upgrade component, which happens to be inside Handsome Jack's office back on Helios. Brick and Mordecai then take Athena to the sanctuary where they and Lilith interrogate her about what she's been up to ever since their previous run-in, back when she was still working for Jack. Athena tells the story of how she ended up working for Jack in the first place. After doing so, Lilith blames her for playing a part in turning Jack into the megalomaniacal wacko that he was, and demands Athena to be executed by firing squad. Now, remember that alien companion that was with Zarpedon back during the events of Borderlands, the pre-sequel? Well, it's revealed that this alien happens to be an Eridian called the Watcher. The Watcher stops Athena from getting executed before approaching Lilith and informing her about an upcoming war, one where she's going to need all the Vault Hunters that she could get. After learning about this, Lilith delays Athena's execution order and ultimately patches things up with her. In addition to that, we learn that Lilith has sent Gage and Axton to assassinate Aurelia on the planet Epita for her involvement with Handsome Jack in the past. But as with Athena, Lilith decides to cancel this order as well. Meanwhile, Valerie forces Fiona and the rest of the group to head to Helios and bring Gortys' upgrade component to her. And to make sure that they don't do anything funny, Valerie assigns August, Kroger, and Finch to join them in this mission. Soon after, the gang's preparations are completed and they all board the ship headed for Helios. Scooter, being the trusty companion that he is, joins the trip. The ship makes its way to the space station, but a huge problem occurs when Saul's lifeless body jams their ship's propulsion system. Fiona and Scooter volunteer to go outside the ship to fix this. And, well, this is where Scooter turns from Borderlands' handy NPC into a goat, as he makes the ultimate sacrifice in order for the rest of the gang to catch a ride all the way to Helios. Not long after, the group arrives on the space station, and Reese impersonates Hugo to get to Jack's office. Along the way, Reese comes across his friend Yvette, who has no idea that it's actually him under the disguise. Yvette gets into it with Hugo, which forces Reese to knock her block off. At the same time, Fiona and Gortys pretend to be a tour group so that they too could reach Jack's office. In the end, however, Fiona fails to find their target location, which prompts Jack to reveal a secret trapdoor that leads to his old office. From there, Fiona, Gortys, and Reese are able to get the upgrade component. As a sweet bonus, Reese also gets his hands on Atlas Corporation's deed. You see, Jack had been busy back when he was still alive. He didn't just wreak havoc on Pandora, he also managed to dismantle Atlas and claim it as his own. And with the deed in Reese's hands, he's now effectively the head of Atlas. Jack eventually finds himself sitting in Jack's old office chair. This allows Jack's consciousness to screw over Reese and take control of Helios. Jack then tells Reese that he's going to claim Reese's body next, with the use of an endoskeleton graft. But our guy manages to escape before that happens. As they make their escape, Reese comes across Yvette and informs her about what Jack just did. In turn, Yvette teams up with Reese as they make their way towards the space station's core in hopes of stopping Jack. Meanwhile, Gortys and Fiona head for the nearest exit. August links up with Fiona and Gortys soon after, but the three bandits screw them over and kidnap Gortys and Sasha, stealing the upgrade component in the process before leaving the rest of the group. In the meantime, Reese and Yvette reach Helios core, and in spite of Jack's attempts to stop them, the duo tinkers with it and successfully sabotages the space station. Sadly, yet another trusty companion meets their end when Loaderbot gives his life to allow Reese and Yvette to escape Helios. At the same time, Fiona also successfully makes her way out of the doomed space station. Helios crashes on Pandora's surface, and Jack tries to take out Reese again by taking control of our boy's cybernetic parts. However, Reese thinks on his feet and prevents Jack from killing him by removing his cybernetic body parts. In the end, Reese is able to put a stop to Jack by trapping him inside his cybernetic eye. And since this is a choose-your-own-adventure game, players are given a choice between permanently destroying Jack's consciousness by having Reese crush his eye, or simply leaving him trapped inside the thing. Regardless, Jack ceases to be a problem for our guys at this point. Meanwhile, Fiona lands on her feet safely and starts looking for Sasha. She starts to fear for the worst when she comes across Find, who pretty much tells Fiona that he's already taken Sasha's life. All the while, we discover that Valerie has successfully installed Gortys' final upgrade. Fiona then eliminates Finch and makes a beeline for Valerie, who at that moment is shooting rockets at Gortys. You see, Valerie got more than she bargained for when Gortys kept the vault of the Traveler in place, right on Pandora. The vault's monster, fittingly named the Traveler, appears out of the vault and gives Valerie what was coming to her. Fiona discovers that Sasha is still alive and well, as the sisters reunite and listen to Gortys when she tells them that they have to destroy her to prevent the Traveler from becoming fully unleashed. Fiona and Sasha do this. Gortys is wrecked, and our heroes go back to living their lives. Problem solved, right? Nope. About a year later, Reese and Fiona receive a message from the EchoNet that ultimately gets them kidnapped by a mysterious stranger. This stranger then orders the two to tell them everything that happened a year before. The stranger then takes them to one of Valerie's old goons, Kroger, and hands the two over to him in exchange for a hostage that Kroger has. All of a sudden, the mysterious stranger turns on Kroger and takes him out. We then find out that the same hostage Kroger was keeping is none other than Vaughn. It turns out that Vaughn gathered the survivors of the Helios crash and has since become the leader of their community. Afterwards, Vaughn takes Fiona and Reese to his tribe, which have settled in Helios wreckage. We get another big surprise when we find out that the stranger is none other than Loaderbot, who managed to survive the Helios crash by repairing himself. Loaderbot would reveal that he saw Fiona and Sasha take out Gortys a year ago, and the reason he contacted and took Reese and Fiona was so that he could hear the full story about what happened. Ultimately, Loaderbot just wants to bring Gortys back to life and free her from being a beacon that's fated to summon the Traveler so that she could live on her own. To do this, Loaderbot asks for his old friends Reese and Fiona's help, to which they agree. Loaderbot has already gathered up the necessary parts to rebuild Gortys. On top of that, Vaughn himself has come up with a plan that would help them take out the Traveler when Gortys inevitably summons it. Soon after, our heroes make the necessary preparations to do just that. Their plan involves Fiona and Sasha blowing up the Traveler from inside its body to soften it up enough for Gortys to line it up right in front of Helios' cannon. From there, it's just a matter of shooting the Traveler and they could all live happily ever after. Along the way, our heroes round up a new squad of allies, whose identities depend on the choices the player makes throughout the game. Regardless, they eventually spring their plan and get into a climactic battle with the Traveler. Almost everything goes smoothly. However, Fiona and Sasha find themselves stuck inside the creature's body when their bomb's detonator malfunctions. So Sasha comes in clutch and decides to stay behind and work out the explosive, while letting Fiona escape the belly of the beast. From there, the plan is put back in motion, and they're able to line the Traveler right in front of Helios' cannon, which permanently destroys it. In the aftermath, our heroes locate Sasha's lifeless body. However, don't worry, because they're able to bring her back to life using one of Felix's old gadgets. Everyone then starts to go on an old-fashioned loot rush, while Reese and Fiona head deep into the vault of the Traveler. Inside, Reese and Fiona encounter a mysterious chest. They open it, and the two mysteriously get bathed in light just as the vault starts to teleport again. Now, this might seem open-ended at first, given that we don't know what happened to Reese and Fiona after the vault whisked them away. Borderlands, dead or alive? However, we eventually find out that Fiona is still alive and well, as she takes center stage in the novel entitled Borderlands, Dead or Alive. We don't dive deep into the story, but all you should know is that Fiona and Sasha team up to try and auction off a super rare Typhon DeLeon doll to some geeky billionaires. Commander Lilith and the Fight for Sanctuary, 2876. Borderlands Saga leads us right back to our remaining OG Vault Hunters, Lilith, Brick, and Mordecai. Along with the Crimson Raiders, our heroes have started making arrangements to locate the Eridian vaults that the Key revealed at the end of Borderlands 2, with the goal of preventing their universe's mega corporations from reaching them. And ever since Roland's death, Lilith has assumed the role of leader to the Crimson Raiders. However, their plans are interrupted when a new band of bad guys ambush the Sanctuary. If you can recall, there's this guy named Colonel Hector who we mentioned all the way at the earlier parts of this video. To jog your memory, Hector and his men used to be model doll soldiers until the company ultimately screwed them over by marooning them on Pandora. They then pretty much became mind dwellers, but they've re-emerged to spread their own brand of terror on the Sanctuary. Hector has branded his gang as New Pandora, and he had one goal: to turn each and every one of Pandora's inhabitants into grotesque monsters using a compound he developed. And if you didn't realize it yet, Hector is nuts, and he thinks doing that will turn the planet into a paradise. So Hector and New Pandora lay siege on the Sanctuary, which forces Lilith to use her siren abilities to evacuate herself, Mordecai, and Brick. From there, the gang would formulate an antigen that would cure the Sanctuary's poor, monsterized citizens before mounting a counteroffensive against Hector and his family. To Hector's credit, the man is no hypocrite, as he's been juicing himself with his monstering compound this whole time. Eventually, our heroes face off against a grotesque monster version of Hector and take down the nut job. They save the Sanctuary and its people, but the battle that ensues turns the Crimson Raiders' stronghold into a mess. Plus, they lose the Key Vault, which, as we already know, contains the map to all the other vaults in the galaxy. However, Lilith reveals in the aftermath that her status as a Siren has granted her a connection to all the Eridian vaults. Simply put, she's pretty much a walking vault tracker. So Lilith proposes to use this ability to continue with their original plan of securing the other vaults and prevent companies like Dahl or Hyperion from getting their hands on them. The Raiders agree to this, which leads us directly to the events of the next mainline entry in the series, Borderlands 3. Borderlands 3, 2877. Borderlands 3's story happens about 7 years after the events of Borderlands 2 and Tales from the Borderlands. As you'd expect, a lot of things happened in the intervening period before our story starts. For one, Ellie, An ace mechanic and another one of Moxxi's kids helped the Crimson Raiders by creating a new stronghold after that whole debacle against Hector. In fact, we discover that this is the third iteration of the Sanctuary. If you're wondering what happened to the second one, even Ellie herself won't tell. More importantly, the 7 years that passed allowed Typhon de Leon's twin kids, Troy and Tyreen, to establish a weird cult that worshipped the Eridian vaults, aptly called the Children of the Vault. By the time Borderlands 3 story starts, most of Pandora's psycho and bandit population have united under Troy and Tyreen's banner. This causes the Crimson Raiders to keep them in check, since the cult and everyone in it are pretty crazy. Now, Borderlands 3 starts with Lilith putting out an ad for Vault Hunters to join them in their fight against the Children of Survival. 4 individuals answer the call and become the main characters of this installment. There's Flack, who used to be more or less a librarian robot before it gained sentience. From then on, Flack started traveling the galaxy to discover more about himself. But make no mistake, this bot is no pacifist. In fact, Flack pretty much worships death and believes that the proper way to pay respects is by living life as a hunter. This same idea also led to Flack having an affinity with animals. Then there's Mose. Mose used to be an elite soldier for another megacorporation called Vladov. She ultimately left their ranks after a mission where her entire unit died. As far as Vladov is concerned, Mose was killed as well, which is why they didn't hunt her down after her defection. Next is Zane. He used to be a bandit during his youth, but eventually became one of the galaxy's most infamous mercenaries. This turned him into a bit of a legend, as well as a pretty wealthy man. But his profession also brought with it lots of enemies. By the time Borderlands 3 kicks off, Zane has chosen Pandora as a place where he could take a break from his assailants, which eventually leads him to join Lilith and the Crimson Raiders. Finally, there's Amara. Amara is from Partali, which could best be described as a slum the size of an entire planet. She's also a siren who inherited the ability to phase trance. Growing up, Amara became sort of a local legend due to her exploits as a crime fighter within its slums. Eventually, Amara's fame spread across certain parts of the galaxy, which effectively turned her into a celebrity. But fame is a tricky thing. Amara's popularity eventually waned, which prompted her to get into the vault hunting profession. All that said, this new quartet of heroes join Lilith and the Crimson Raiders when they arrive on Pandora. They lay siege to one of the Children of the Vault's hideouts before Lilith tasks them with retrieving a map that will lead them to a vault, one that the cult possesses. So our heroes do just that, and they learn that this vault is on a planet called Promethea, which also happens to be the home base of the Atlas Corporation. They prepare to leave for Promethea, but Troy and Tyreen catch up to them. Our heroes learn that both Tyreen and Troy are Sirens, which we already covered earlier in the video. Anyway, a fight ensues between the twins and our gang, which ends with Tyreen using her phase leeching ability to absorb Lilith's own siren powers. She then takes the vault map and heads over to Promethea. Lilith and her Crimson Raiders follow suit. They reach Promethea only to find out that a couple of other corporations named Maliwan and COV have teamed up in an attempt to take control of Atlas. More than that, Maliwan's head honcho, a dude named Katagawa Jr., has aligned his company with the Children of the Vault. Now, remember when Reese got the deed to Atlas during the events of Tales from the Borderlands? It's here we find out that Reese eventually used this deed to claim leadership over the company as Atlas CEO after the end of that storyline. So our heroes then join up with Reese and Atlas to fend off their attackers. After that, Reese informs the group that the key to the vault on Promethea can be found on a different planet called Athenas. They head to that planet and meet one of the main characters from Borderlands 2, Maya. We learn that Maya has since taken a girl named Ava under her wing, and the two join our heroes in their quest. They soon acquire the key, but find out that it's just a fragment. They need 2 more to complete it. Classic video game stuff. Shortly after, they head back to Promethea and gain possession of the second key fragment from Katagawa Jr. Then they meet with Reese again, who reveals that he has the 3rd key fragment. Reese hands over his fragment to the group and tells them the exact location of the vault. The Crimson Raiders waste no time and head to the vault, where they're able to defeat the monster housed within it, called the Rampager. However, things escalate for the group when the twins confront them. Tyreen uses her phase leeching ability to gain the Rampage's power, and we find out that the twins plan on stealing all of the Vault monster's powers before they reach their ultimate goal, the Great Vault. A scuffle ensues between our heroes and the twins. Ava steps up to the villains, but she doesn't stand a chance against them. This prompts Maya to come to her rescue. Maya saves her young protege, but our story takes a dark turn when Troy eliminates Maya and absorbs her siren abilities. Our heroes decide to prevent the twins from reaching the other vaults, so they next head to a planet called Eden 6 where one of these structures is located. Now, Eden 6 is owned by the Jacobs Corporation. The Jacobs Corporation is headed by Wainwright Jacobs, who agrees to aid the Crimson Raiders in exchange for saving his boyfriend, Alistair Hammerlock. Yep, it's the same Alistair who rebuilt Claptrap and helped the Vault Hunters of Borderlands 2. They succeed in this mission, and it's here we see Borderlands the pre-sequel's Aurelia pop up once more. It turns out that Aurelia screwed over her brother Alistair and has now struck up a partnership with Troy and Tyreen. Aurelia's deal with the twins allows her to take control of Jacobs Corporation with the key to the vault on Eden 6 as payment. In response, the Crimson Raiders come into conflict with Aurelia, which ends with her death and our heroes obtaining the key. They then head over to the vault, where they come face to face with its monster known as the Grave Ward. The group manages to take down the Grave Ward, but the twins arrive on the scene yet again to try and absorb the fallen creature. However, Patricia is able to use her siren powers and siphon the Grave Ward's power herself before Tyreen could do so. Now, let's hold on a minute. You might be wondering how in the world Patricia Tanis suddenly became a siren. Well, we learned that Patricia actually inherited Angel's siren abilities after she perished during the events of Borderlands 2. From then on, Patricia kept this from anyone else, except Lilith, and developed her siren powers in secret. Back to our story. Troy and Tyreen abduct Patricia, with the intention of executing her in public back on Pandora. The Crimson Raiders pursue the twins in order to rescue their friend. Once they get back on Pandora and link up with Patricia, she finally reveals the exact details of how she became a siren to the rest of her allies. On top of that, Patricia informs the group that she has learned about the twins' grand plan. They want to open the Great Vault so that they could steal the Destroyer's power and life force. In order to stop them, Crimson Raiders first lay siege on COV's main office in an attempt to stop their enemies. However, Troy still manages to awaken the key to the Great Vault, which happens to be Alpus itself, Pandora's moon. Still, our heroes are able to take out Troy, which then allows Ava to gain the siren abilities that Troy took from her mentor, Maya. At this point, however, the Great Vault has started to open its doors. All the while, Tyreen siphons off Troy's powers and makes her exit. Right after, our heroes receive a call from the twins' dad and the first ever Vault Hunter, Typhon. Typhon tells them to meet him at Necrotafeo, the Eridians' ancient homeworld. Soon after, our heroes arrive on the planet and link up with Typhon, who explains the true origins of the Great Vault. For one, the Great Vault isn't located on Pandora, it is Pandora. And you already know the rest, about how the structure keeps the Destroyer from gobbling up the entire universe and all that. The Crimson Raiders then proceed to acquire the key fragments that would help them reseal the Great Vault using the same machine that the ancient siren Nyriad used thousands of years ago to imprison the Destroyer. Along the way, Tyreen catches up to them and reveals that she and Troy are Typhon's kids. As we discover, the Calypso de Leon family was living a happy life until the death of the twins' mother and Typhon's late wife, Leda Calypso. Eventually, the twins grew into a couple of bad eggs and left their family home to start their crazy conquest. Soon after, Typhon meets his end at the hands of Tyreen after she deactivates the machine that would seal the Destroyer back into the Great Vault. She then proceeds to head back to Pandora to fulfill her and Troy's ultimate goal. Of course, our heroes instantly go after her. They get there not long after Tyreen, but the deranged villain has already fused herself with the Destroyer. A climactic battle ensues between Tyreen, the Destroyer, and the Crimson Raiders. They take her out, but there's still one moon-sized problem: Alpus. You see, Alpus continues to do its thing, which is to open the Great Vault, which threatens to destroy all of Pandora. To stop this from happening, Lilith uses all her remaining energy to deactivate Alpus. She successfully stops Pandora's moon from destroying the planet, but at the cost of Lilith's life. When the dust settles, Lilith's body has disappeared. Curiously enough, our heroes see that she left her trademark Firehawk insignia on Alpus. The group and the rest of the Crimson Raiders pay homage to their fallen commander not long after that. Moxxi's heist of the handsome Jackpot. Sometime later, Mad Moxxi hires our heroes to go on a mission on one of Handsome Jack's remaining facilities, a space casino called the Handsome Jackpot. Since, well, Moxxi plans on taking over the casino, upon reaching the place, the group comes across Timothy. You know, Jack's old body double and the main characters from Borderlands the pre-sequel. We find out that Timothy has been trapped inside the Handsome Jackpot ever since the original Jack died. Timothy's a little worse for wear, since the casino's boss, Pretty Boy, has basically taken over the facility since then. On the bright side, Timothy had a device called the Winning Hand grafted onto his body, which allows him to unlock each and every room in the casino. This adventure would see the gang teaming up with Timothy and ultimately take down Pretty Boy, with Moxxi gaining control of the handsome Jackpot shortly after. Guns, love, and tentacles. A bit later, the gang would go to a planet called Xylorgos to attend the wedding of their old friend Alistair Hammerlock to his fiancée Wainwright Jacobs. Now, Xylorgos has become home to a woman named Eleanor Olmsted. She used to be a scientist working for the Doll Corporation along with her husband Vincent Olmsted. However, the two eventually found themselves becoming a servant to a creature named Githian. Githian is one of those problematic creatures that the Eridians sealed within the planet millennia ago. However, it's unique among its grotesque peers in that it can't seem to die. Not much is known about how exactly Githian first met its supposed end, much less how it got out of its vault, but by the time Alistair and Wainwright were about to get married, the creature had already sunk its claws deep into Xylorgos. By that, I mean that Githian has the ability to influence minds on a planetary scale, which explains how the inhabitants of Xylorgos acted as though they were a cult dedicated to this undead vault monster. This story's whole gist is that Vincent has been trapped inside Githian's heart ever since he started doing weird experiments some 60 years ago. This rendered him kinda immortal. In turn, Eleanor also eventually fell victim to Githian's mad influence due to a ring that Vincent crafted containing a piece of the vault monster. In the present, all the Olmsteds want is for Vincent to find a worthy vessel that would free his body from Githian's heart, so that he and Eleanor could be together again. To do that, the Olmsteds attempt to take over Wainwright's body. Oh, the things we do for love. Ultimately, the Vault Hunters managed to rescue Wainwright and take out Githian. This then freed Eleanor and Vincent from the creature's influence, and they were reunited once more before the two passed on. Finally, Alistair and Wainwright get married right inside Githian's heart. Bounty of Blood, a fistful of redemption. The Vault Hunters' next adventure takes place on a planet called Gehenna. Suffice it to say that Gehenna is one of those unfortunate places that became victim to one of the Borderlands universe's megacorps. In this case, the Jacobs Corporation exploited a unique mineral only found on Gehenna called core. With core, the company would develop a gruesome bioweapon called the Runer. Even shadier is when you find out that Jacobs did this by twisting the physiology of Gehenna's inhabitants. Our heroes would visit Gehenna after taking a job posted by one of Gehenna's last remaining settlements. The main antagonist of this story is a woman named Butcher Rose and her outlaw gang called the Devil Riders, who want nothing else than to take Gehenna for their own. Ultimately, Rose would escape death at the hands of our heroes, but she'd unleash the Ruiner on them. Another gun-toting battle ensues, and you guessed it, the Vault Hunters take down the creature and get their pay. Psycho Krieg and the fantastic Fustercluck. Sometime later, our Vault Hunters join Patricia in one of her latest endeavors, to find out more about the Psychos. To do this, Patricia enlists the help of Krieg, and after analyzing his mind, Patricia discovers Valhalla, a sort of common denominator that runs among all Psychos' inner states. The Vault Hunters enter Krieg's mind in an attempt to learn more about Valhalla. What starts as a typical adventure for our heroes turns into a sincere, heartfelt tale about Krieg coming to terms with Maya's demise. New Tales from the Borderlands, 2878. Borderlands' next main entry comes in the form of another choose-your-own-adventure game called New Tales from the Borderlands. Here we meet three new main characters. There's Anu, who's a scientist working at Reese Atlas Corporation, Octavio, Anu's brother who wants to score big, and Fran, a lady who runs a space yogurt shop. New Tales from the Borderlands opens with Anu presenting her newest invention to Atlas CEO Reese. This gadget happens to be a gun that shoots non-lethal rays, so it's no surprise that Reese rejects it, since companies like Atlas want things that are as lethal as possible. To add injury to insult, Reese fires Anu right on the spot. But then a company called Teddy Orr ambushes Atlas offices right after, looking to grab a vault key from Atlas. Anu escapes the ensuing chaos and travels to Promethea. There she meets with Octavio and his assassin robot partner Louis. Anu makes Fran's acquaintance shortly after. The thing is, Teddy Orr, the company that attacked Atlas, is actually hunting for Octavio. Their search ultimately leads them to Fran's yogurt shop, and they proceed to wreck the whole place. Our three heroes survive the attack, and soon come up with a plan to band together in order to discover what Tedior's goals really are. Their investigation eventually leads them to yet another vault where the trio comes face to face with a monster called the Devourer. So Anu, Octavio, and Fran muster all their might to take the Devourer down. They then acquire one of the crystals from the Devourer's body, the same thing that gave it the ability to regenerate from its injuries. Octavio, being the enterprising scoundrel he is, hatches a scheme to use the crystal shard in conjunction with Anu's non-lethal gun and participate in a reality show called Sink or Swim, which is like a Borderlands universe version of Shark Tank. As he puts it, they'd have enough money to each start their own businesses should they win the show. This plan ultimately works when a mystery investor funds their pitch. Everything's going their way, right? Well, things get dicey when we find out that Tedior had found Anu's ID back at the Devourer's vault. They then promptly hunt down Anu and manage to take her out. However, Octavio comes in clutch when he uses the Devourer's shard to resurrect his sister. Curiously though, a mysterious entity possesses Anu's body the moment she comes in. This entity tells our heroes that it wants to find its so-called twin. To escape Tedior's clutches, our heroes attempt to enlist the help of the mystery investor, who helped them win Sink or Swim. However, they soon find out that this 1%er is none other than the leader of Tedior itself, Susan Caldwell. Everything that has happened since the reality show was a ruse meant to get our heroes to hand over the Devourer's shard to Susan. From there, we find out that Susan is planning on crafting a new weapon that has the ability to take out and resurrect its targets over and over again. This weapon can be realized with the use of the shard. In addition, it turns out that this shard is just half of a whole. In fact, Susan is so confident that her new planned weapon would sell like hotcakes that she tries to strong-arm all the other megacorporations to be absorbed by Tedior. But Susan did not account for one thing: the entity from our hero's half of the shard that has possessed Anu. Ultimately, this entity emerges from Anu once more and manages to take Susan's shard before embedding it in Anu's body. In response, Susan captures our heroes and attempts to separate Anu from the shard with the help of Tedior's experts. On the other hand, the rest of our heroes, Fran, Louis, and Octavio, each successfully escape captivity and link up with one another before reaching Anu. Anu reveals that she's had a chance to speak with the mysterious entity living inside her. However, they have more pressing matters at hand as they also find out that Susan has successfully plagiarized a supersized version of Anu's original gun invention. Our heroes soon get into a confrontation with the villains, which tragically ends in Louis' destruction. On the bright side, Louis' death allows the rest of the group to reach Susan for one final showdown. But not before the scummy CEO unleashes her huge ripoff of an invention on Prometheus's inhabitants. It's here where players are given a choice. On one hand, we could opt for Anu to fully assimilate with the entity inside her, which effectively ends her life, but gives her the ability to bring down Susan. On the other hand, players can choose to have all our remaining heroes band together to defeat Susan instead. Whichever you choose, our heroes manage to defeat Susan, and both shards ultimately become whole. In the end, the fully realized entity zooms off into the vast reaches of the galaxy, while Promethea's citizens are revived. Now, this is where things get vague for Borderlands continuity, as New Tales from the Borderlands has 3 distinct endings that all depend on the choices the player makes throughout the game. One ending sees Anu, Octavio, and Fran losing each of their lives. Another one has them survive until the end before each striking out on their own. Finally, the third ending, which you could consider to be the quote-unquote good ending, sees our 3 heroes establishing a startup business and bringing back Louis. However, a common thread runs in each of these 3 endings. And it's in the story's epilogue, where we find out that the game's entire plot is a story told by none other than Marcus, the bus driver. We see him relating this tale to Fiona, one of the heroines from the OG Tales from the Borderlands. The next time we see Borderlands' roster of quirky characters is in another comic book miniseries called Borderlands: Moxxi's Mysterious Memento. In this one, we get reacquainted with Amara, who has been experiencing a bit of a slump ever since the last time we saw her. You see, Amara longs for a return to a life of fame as a crime-fighting celebrity. She teams up with a couple of other hired mercenaries, the gunslinging, noodle-loving Ziff and his depressed robot companion Varen. They take on a mission given by Moxxi, who instructs them to retrieve a statue stolen by one of her ex-boyfriends. This leads our heroes to a place called Sidran City, aka Rancid City, which is a gigantic slum run by a mafioso named Tio. Along the way, the group also teams up with one of Moxxi's kids, Ellie, and Lore, an old friend of Amara who has set up a coffee shop in Sidran City. Ultimately, they manage to locate Moxxi's statue, which is revealed to be a gift given to her by her late son Scooter. What starts as a zany adventure ultimately becomes one of Borderlands' best send-offs for its trusty mechanic, as we find out that Scooter's statue actually holds the controls for a giant, robotic bird he created to protect his mom should he not be around. When all is said and done, our heroes manage to free Sidran City from Tio's clutches before they hand off Scooter's parting gift to Moxxi. On top of that, each member of the group gets what they want. Lore is able to build a new coffee shop. Ziff is offered full-time employment at one of Sidran's establishments. Varen gets a bunch of free upgrades from the city's mayor, and Amara becomes popular again. But there's one curious detail that happens before this miniseries ends. In the epilogue, Amara and Moxxi reunite at a bar when their old pal Zane steps in. He tells them that he volunteered Amara to take care of Ava's pet, Hermes. Zane informs them that Hermes is aboard Sanctuary 3, and when the two women learn about this, they ask their old friend if they could hitch a ride somewhere, because it turns out that both Amari and Moxxi don't believe that Lilith is truly dead and gone. And so, the comic ends with them setting off into space to look for Lilith. Borderlands 4, 2883. And so, we arrive at the latest mainline installment of the series, Borderlands 4. Similar to its predecessors, this entry introduces us to a new gang of Vault Hunters who serve as this tale's main protagonists. First, there's Vex. She's the siren of the group, gifted with the ability to create familiars made of energy to do her bidding. If you ask me, her siren abilities are sort of similar to Amara's phase trance powers. Now, Vex used to be a relatively normal girl working as a cashier at a weapons shop, until a hardcore deep discount sale at the store awakened her siren abilities. She ended up accidentally wrecking the entire store and taking out all the riotous patrons of the shop. From there, she'd abandon her post and take on a new career as a Vault Hunter. Then there's Rafa. He used to be one of the Tediore Corporation's hired muscles. Specifically, Rafa was raised on a planet with microgravity, which severely changed his physiology. The Tediore Corporation would outfit him with an experimental armor called the Exosuit upon getting hired, something that Rafa needed to allow him to survive in places within the universe that didn't have microgravity. However, things went awry for Rafa when he realized that the company had pretty much tricked him into a life of servitude for the remainder of his life. Specifically, the company eventually revealed that they were making adjustments to their exosuits, which eliminated the need for living soldiers to do their bidding. In other words, Tediore planned on eliminating Rafa and subsequently turning him into the company's very own undead meat puppets. Of course, Rafa didn't want this to happen to him. All he wanted was to explore the galaxy after all. So he ran away in truly spectacular fashion, as he broke out of Tediore's facility guns a-blazing, and soon after that our boy went into the vault hunting business, making the most of whatever time he had left on this world. Next is Harlow. Now, Harlow belongs to the Trant family, which has a long tradition of working for the Maliwan Corporation. However, Harlow is much smarter than the rest of her relatives, because she is a technological genius who was able to craft revolutionary weapons using her big brain. This also made her a bit of an outsider to the rest of the Trant family, which ultimately led our girl to abandon them and the Maliwan Corporation. So after stealing a few of her own inventions and blowing one of her brothers to bits when they tried bringing her back to the fold, Harlow decided to become a Vault Hunter. Finally, there's Aman. He's a not-so-gentle giant who's classified as a Forge Knight. Aman grew up in a community that worshipped vault monsters as gods. However, Aman would ultimately find himself on a quest for vengeance after one of those same vault creatures he worshipped massacred his entire community. From then on, Aman made a vow to take out any vault monster he could find. Sometime after starting his crusade, Aman came into conflict with a different vault monster cult that was just getting ready to unleash a beast on their planet. Long story short, Aman and the cult got into it just as the cult leader had opened the vault. Aman would destroy the gateway to prevent the creature from emerging, and even lose an eye along the way when the cult leader shoots him. But in the end, everything worked out for the Forge Knight, as he ultimately took down the cult and prevented a catastrophe from happening. Eventually, he became a Vault Hunter and found himself teaming up with the rest of this ragtag bunch. Oh, and his favorite ice cream flavor is pistachio. Yum! Now, Borderlands 4 is primarily set on a planet named Kairos, 6 years after the events of Borderlands 3. Kairos used to be hidden from the rest of the galaxy until Lilith used her siren abilities to transport the entirety of Elpis away from its original place orbiting Pandora. From then on, Kairos' existence became known to the other parts of the galaxy. Kairos is ruled by a man known only as the Timekeeper. The Timekeeper is this seemingly immortal dude who rules Kairos with an iron fist, with his own cult-like group called the Order. You see, Kairos, like a few other planets in the galaxy, also had its own vault, something that the Timekeeper had been keeping a secret from the universe at large. It's also rumored that the Timekeeper's immortality comes from this vault's gifts. But now that his home planet has become more or less public knowledge, it didn't take long before Vault Hunters and other parties started arriving on Kairos. In fact, this is where our story begins, with Vex, Amon, Rafa, and Harlow getting out of their ship to set foot on this once secret planet. The first thing our band of Vault Hunters does is lay waste to a large gang of psychos wreaking havoc on the Kairos surface. However, their party is cut short when the Timekeeper's men arrive, led by a man named Warden Skaith. They're soon sent to the planet's prison, where Skaith straps our Vault Hunters to an operating chair before introducing them to the Timekeeper. This isn't a cordial meeting either, as the Timekeeper implants a cybernetic bolt in each of their bodies. Right after that, and as if on cue, the facility is ambushed by a guy named RJ, who happens to be both a Vault Hunter and a member of a rebel group called the Crimson Resistance. The Crimson Resistance is pretty much a group that aims to liberate Kairos from the Timekeeper's clutches. RJ is also accompanied by his very own robot sidekick, Echo 4. The Vault Hunters then team up with the two rebels and proceed to make their escape. Along the way, RJ tries to rescue other prisoners so that they can join the Crimson Resistance too. However, they soon find out that they're too late, since the Timekeeper had already eliminated them in the ensuing chaos. It's also here where we find out that the Timekeeper uses a device similar to the ones he attached to the Vault Hunters as a method of controlling people's minds and having them do his bidding. With the potential recruits all dead and gone, RJ, Echo 4, and the Vault Hunters decide to make their way out of the facility. During their escape, they also encounter Skaith and defeat him. However, the Vault Hunters get a taste of the Timekeeper's mind control shenanigans right after that. The Timekeeper tries to use the Vault Hunters to take out RJ, but the Rebel uses Echo 4 to switch places with the Timekeeper-controlled Vault Hunter. In turn, our heroes are freed from the Timekeeper's control, but RJ becomes possessed by the Tyrant. In a tragic turn of events, the Timekeeper takes out RJ with his knife. The Order's ships then arrive and shoot at the Vault Hunters, which sends them falling off a cliff. Later, our heroes awaken to find themselves at the Crimson Resistance's base of operations, where they first meet our old robotic pal Claptrap. On a side note, Claptrap was actually the one who founded the Crimson Resistance. Claptrap welcomes our heroes as the Crimson Resistance's newest recruits and guides them through their base of operations until they reach its communication tower. After activating it, the gang receives a distress call from Rush, another rebel from a group called the Outbounders, who asks for backup against the Order. So, the Vault Hunters head on over to the Outbounders' hideout and help them fend off the Order's forces, which are led by a guy named Idolator Soul. Soul then informs our heroes and the other rebels that the Order has a secret weapon that they're going to use against anyone who doesn't want to get in line with the Timekeeper's program. Soon after, our heroes meet with Rush, who thanks them for the assist and promptly merges the Outbounders with the Crimson Resistance. Rush then instructs the Vault Hunters to find Soul's spy master and learn more about this secret weapon. Here we also meet Conway, the Outbounders mechanic, who gives our heroes a sweet ride called a Digi-Runner to help them get around Kairos. The Vault Hunters soon encounter the spy master, Horus, but the Timekeeper takes control of the guy before our heroes can interrogate him. This leads to a fight that ends in Horus's death. However, Rush tells the gang to take Horus's bolt in hopes of gleaning data about the secret weapon from it. They then go back to the Outbounders base, where Conway is able to scour the bolt's contents, as it plays a message Soul had with Horus. Our heroes learn that the secret weapon Soul was bragging about is called Lotus, a biological weapon which is fortunately still incomplete. Conway and Rush then propose that the Vault Hunters search for a former Order scientist to help them learn more and ultimately destroy Lotus. They soon find the scientist, a lady named Zadra. However, their meeting is cut short when Soul's forces barge into Zadra's lab and kidnap her. This forces our heroes to retrieve the scientist from their enemies. Soon enough, the Vault Hunters reach Zadra's location and learn that she left the Timekeeper's faction out of her own free will. Our heroes then ask for her help in stopping Soul's biological weapon, to which Zadra agrees. On top of that, Zadra informs the gang that the only way to get to the Kairos Vault and the Timekeeper is by collecting 3 special bolts that he implanted in 3 of his generals. One of them is none other than Idolator Soul. Then there's Vile Lictor, a fanatical scientist working for the Order. Third among them is Callus, a woman who used to be the Timekeeper's strongest and most loyal soldier, until she became what Zadra only refers to as a monster. She now calls herself the Ripper Queen. Each of these generals rules over their own sectors on Kairos. On a side note, Borderlands 4 is kind of an open world game, which means players can deal with each of these generals in no particular order. Regardless, its story beats remain the same regardless of which order you choose. In any case, Zadra and the Vault Hunters then infiltrate Soul's facility, where they discover that Lotus is a weapon that transforms ordinary individuals into hulking monstrosities under Soul's control. However, they fail to locate Soul himself. Even worse, the Vault Hunters learn that he and his men are currently laying siege to the Outbounders' hideout. So, the gang heads back to their allies and helps them deal with the Order once more. In the aftermath, the Vault Hunters, Zadra, and Rush have a meeting where the former Order scientist proposes that Rush sent all his men to storm Soul's fortress. Rush doesn't take kindly to this since he doesn't want to lose his people. Things get heated fast, and Rush even reveals to our heroes that Zadra used to be the Timekeeper's favorite underling. So much so that Adra happens to be one of the few people on Kairos whom the Timekeeper gifted with immortality. We also find out that Zadra was one of the very first settlers to arrive on Kairos, along with the Timekeeper. However, despite this, Zadra states that those days are long gone, and that she's not a member of the Order anymore. Cooler heads prevail, and Rush comes up with a plan to send a strike team to infiltrate the fortress and take out Soul. Our heroes waste no time and start blasting through Soul's stronghold until they reach the hulking fanatic himself. As you'd expect, a high-octane battle between the Vault Hunters and Soul ensues, which ends with a resounding W for our heroes. In turn, they're able to retrieve one of the special bolts. 1 down, 2 to go. Soon after that, our heroes proceed with retrieving the second special bolt, which leads them to encounter a new anti-Order rebel cell called the Electi. Now, the Electi is different from the Outbounders in that it's a group made up mostly of former Order aristocrats who have since defected from the cult when the Timekeeper abandoned them after Alpus' arrival on Kairos. From then on, the Electi found themselves slumming it in Callus' domain, which forced them to contend with the Ripper Queen's forces. We also find out that Callus might be an enemy, but she's actually not in league with the Timekeeper anymore. Nowadays, Callus runs her own crew of bloodthirsty bandits called the Rippers, who pretty much worship her as their own god. Plus, Callus has gotten it into her head that she's Kairos' prophesied savior. More than that, we also learn that she had already removed her own bolt, which eventually came into the hands of the Electi. The Vault Hunters then strike a bargain with Levane, the leader of Electi, Callus Bolt, in exchange for taking out the Ripper Queen and her bandit gang. Along the way, we also meet some familiar faces from previous installments of the Borderlands series, as Moxxi and Zane find themselves setting up shop on this planet after their ship crashed on its surface. Even more interesting is when we find out that Zane and Levane used to be lovers. All this leads Zane, Moxxi, the Electi, and the Vault Hunters to form an alliance to deal with Callus. Things get complicated though, as our heroes soon deal with the Ripper's direct attack on the Electi's home base. This eventually allows Callus to take back her special bolt, prompting the Vault Hunters to pursue their target with Zane's help. We also find out that Callus is angling to use her bolt to travel to Alpus, thinking that she can turn into a literal god there. However, the Vault Hunters ultimately take out Callus and retrieve the second special bolt they need. Even better, Callus' defeat soon leads to the Rippers becoming fractured. All this convinces the Electi to merge themselves with the Crimson Resistance. With 2 of the bolts in their possession, the gang then proceeds to acquire the last one belonging to Vile Lictor. First, Zadra tells our heroes to link up with a man named Defiant Calder, another anti-Order rebel who leads his own group made up of the native Augur population of Kairos. The group soon meets Calder, who tells them to retrieve an Eridian artifact that the Augurs deem to be sacred to their community. Our heroes do just that. Curiously, they also receive a cryptic message from a mysterious voice, telling them to look for someone they only refer to as the Siren. Our heroes then present the artifact to Calder, who then leads them to the Augur's Council. The Vault Hunters gain the community's trust, and Calder soon directs them to yet another familiar face from the series, Amara. Just as a refresher, Zane, Amara, and Moxxi's arrival on Kairos some time ago is actually a direct continuation of what happened at the end of the Borderlands Moxxi's Mysterious Memento comic book miniseries. And whereas Zane and Moxxi decided to set up a classic dive bar on Kairos after their arrival, Amara instead chose to join up with Calder and the Augurs in her mission to locate Lilith, who has gone AWOL after the whole Elpis debacle. Calder then decides to bring the fight to Vile Lictor, after the mad scientist takes out one of the Augur's council members in the middle of their meeting. Soon after, Amara and the Vault Hunters decide to infiltrate a facility controlled by Vile Lictor, believing that the evil scientist is holding Lilith captive there as a part of his experiments. See, Vile Lictor is a madman who's obsessed with discovering the truth about the Sirens and their abilities. Amara and our heroes do locate a certain test subject in Vile Lictor's lab, but it ultimately escapes before they can investigate it further. They eventually hunt down Vile Lictor, and although Amara loses one of her arms during this mission, the rest of our heroes manage to take down the insane scientist and grab the last special bolt they need to reach the Timekeeper. The test subject remerges as soon as the Vault Hunters take down Vile Lictor. We then get a big twist when we learn that this wayward experiment isn't Lilith, it's RJ, who reveals that the Timekeeper sent him to Vile Lictor after his apparent death. Vile Lictor then conducted horrendous experiments on the dude, which successfully granted him siren-like abilities of his own. On the other hand, the same procedures RJ had to go through also broke his mind. He's not the noble rascal that our heroes met at the beginning of the story anymore. Instead, RJ has become a deranged maniac fueled by revenge against his perceived enemy Lilith, whom he thinks was the root cause of all the suffering he endured. We also find out that Lilith might be trapped in the phase dimension, the same realm from which Sirens get their abilities. And, well, RJ plans on making sure she stays in there for eternity. And now, insane RJ teleports away after meeting our heroes. On a brighter note, their victory against Vile Lictor adds the Augurs to the Crimson Resistance ever-growing Rebel Alliance. Later, the Vault Hunters present the 3 bolts to Zadra, who then proceeds to tweak them so that they'd open the Kairos Vault. Shortly after, our heroes link up with Amara, who's replaced her severed arm with a cybernetic one, and Zane. They then come up with a plan to rescue Lilith from the phase dimension, which they can enter through a portal on Elpis. So the gang wastes no time and travels to the displaced Pandoran moon, only for RJ to ambush them on the way. Callus also makes another appearance, as it's revealed that she survived her battle against the Vault Hunters thanks to all the cybernetic parts on her body. Still, our heroes eventually arrive on Elpis and manage to finally free Lilith from the phase dimension. They then take out Callus for a second time, and we learn that the prophesied savior of Kairos happens to be none other than Lilith. Lilith then uses her siren ability to teleport herself and the rest of her allies back to Kairos. Even better, the chaos that ensued on Elpis during the rescue mission managed to fracture the moon further. This leads to a huge Elpis fragment crashing towards Kairos and right through one of the walls of the Timekeeper's stronghold, aka Dominion City. Lilith and her old friends reunite soon after that, while the Vault Hunters make preparations to confront the Timekeeper. However, tragedy strikes when our heroes fall victim to the Timekeeper's mind control ability, who uses them to assassinate Zadra. Well, wrong move, Mr. Timekeeper, because this just makes the gang more resolute on taking him down. So the Vault Hunters waste no time in locating the dastardly villain deep within Dominion City, where we learn that the Timekeeper is actually the Kairos Vault Guardian. Long story short, our heroes dunk on the Timekeeper, effectively releasing the planet's inhabitants from his control. But a Vault Hunter's gotta hunt vaults, right? So they proceed to open it after the Timekeeper's downfall. RJ pops up and goes on an insane rant before the gang can proceed. He then challenges the Vault Hunters to tussle and ultimately gets the sweet release he's been longing for. With RJ out of the way, our heroes step deeper into the vault and discover its so-called treasure, a Lilith from the not-so-distant future. This incarnation of Lilith warns our heroes that the universe is about to end soon, before giving them a strange artifact called the Deodand, which she says is instrumental for their survival. Future Lilith then disappears, and OG Lilith debriefs the gang that they'll use Moxxi's bar as their headquarters. OG Lilith then transports everyone there, and in the closing scene, she tasks the Vault Hunters to defend Kairos' now freed citizens from any threats that linger on the planet. And that, guys, is the full Borderlands timeline. Thank you for staying with me throughout this journey, and I hope you loved watching this video as much as I did making it. I'll see you guys real soon. Keep on hunting.